Cadeirydd y cyfarfod heddiw yw Cadeirydd yr Ymddiriedolaeth, yr athro Donna Mead OBE. Mae 6 aelod annibynnol arall gan y bwrdd fel y gwelwch o'r wybodaeth ac gyflwynir. Today's meeting will be chaired by the Trust Chair, Professor Donna Mead OBE. As you can see from the slide, the board also includes 6 independent members. Yn ymuno â nhw, mae aelodau bwrdd gweithredol yr Ymddiriedolaeth. Joining them today are the Trust's executive board members. Croeso hefyd I rai o'n partneriaid allanol. We also welcome some of our key external partners to today's meeting. Mae'r bwrdd yn gyfrifol am reoli perfformiad a strategaeth yr Ymddiriedolaeth. The board is responsible for the strategy and performance of the Trust. Bydd y cadeirydd yn agor ein cyfarfod yn awr. The Chair will now open our meeting.
Start. Okay. Bore da pawb a croeso I cyfarfod yma. It's the July meeting of the Velindre University NHS Public Trust Board. And as you've just heard, I'm pleased to confirm that this meeting is being live streamed today for those of you who are joining this meeting remotely. And a recording of this meeting will also be made available on the Trust website very soon after the meeting, should members of the public and staff wish to review the recording at their convenience. And for those of you that have joined the meeting today, which I understand to be a mix of our staff and the public, a very warm welcome to you all. Croeso cynnes iawn I chi gyd. If I could take us please to apologies next. I don't have any formal apologies apart from one of our independent members. Hilary, you might not be able to stay with us all morning, so we're grateful that you have joined us, and if you need to pop out, just pop out, Hilary. Thank you. Does anybody know of any apologies that I should have received that haven't come my way? Right, thank you. In attendance today, we have a number of staff who I'd like to welcome. First of all, Stephen Allen, the Chief Officer for the Community Health Council. Welcome, Stephen.
Stephen's got his hand up.
Oh, Stephen, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Chair. Just to say that I also send Brenda Chamberlain's apologies, our Vice Chair today.
Okay, thank you. Could that be recorded, please? Yes. Thank you. I haven't seen, is David Cogan, are you here, David? No, so I haven't seen, but David might join us, and he's our patient liaison representative. And as the agenda, as we move through the agenda, a number of staff will be joining us, including Mohammed Yassin, who's our Head of Infection Prevention and Control. He'll be joining us for an item later on in the agenda. Tina Jenkins, our Senior Nurse for Safeguarding and Public Protection. Anna Harris, our Senior Nurse Professional Standards. And Nigel, who's already with us, Nigel Downs, our Interim Deputy Director of Nursing Quality and Patient Experience. But I'll introduce individuals as we come to the agenda item that they've attended for. So if we can now start the meeting, the process for asking questions, this is a hybrid meeting. The majority of the board are in this room with us today, and I have to say how enjoyable it is to have everybody sitting around the table and to be able to really see people's smiles and to be able to interact on a one-to-one basis. But we have got some colleagues who've joined us remotely, so it's hybrid. If you were in the room and you wish to raise a point or ask a question, please raise what's being called your analog hand, which is just put your hand up and I'll do my best to notice it. Lauren Fear, our board secretary, sitting next to me, will also be keeping a close eye on electronic hands that are raised. If you see Lauren passing me a note or nudging me, it's because she's noticed somebody's got their hand up. So I hope that process will work. 1.30 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest pertinent to the items on today's agenda which need to be declared? No. Thank you very much. So we now come to item 1.40 on the agenda, which is matters arising from our last meeting. And for that, we need to turn to the action log, which is in your papers. I just check, has everybody got a full set of papers? I should have checked that earlier. Has everybody got a full set of papers? Just find the action log. Right, got it. So there are 12 items on the action log, and I am proposing today that we close 10 of them, and those to be closed are highlighted in green on your in your papers. And then we have 2 that remain open, which I'm going to refer to now, 7.20, and this is from the meeting held on the 27th of the 1st, 2022, which refers to the Cardiff Cancer Research Hub. And this was for the proposal for a tripartite partnership between Cardiff and Vale, UHB, Cardiff University and Velindre University NHS Trust. And the next phase of the development, if you remember, Jazz informed us, was to include agreement for key principles that will go into establish a formal heads of terms going forward. So what we're needing to know is, have the heads of terms been agreed, Jazz?
So as the update says, Chair, that it's on target for a date in November 2022 to have that agreed, but the discussions are ongoing. So, you know, there's a partnership board, in fact, next week where this is on the agenda. So it's not yet agreed, but it's in progress.
Thank you. And if referring to the minutes just for a second in relation to this item, we did also agree that we would look at branding. Oh, God, wait a minute. It was on. So, Jazz, we also agreed with that item that we would look at branding.
Yes, so those discussions have started and are also in progress. So hopefully we might be able to conclude on both items for November.
Thank you. Thank you, Jazz. And then the second item which remains open is 5.10, the trust enabling strategies for approval. If you remember, we did approve the trust enabling strategies at our last board meeting, but they did include case studies, which we considered would be circulated to the board when finalised. So, Carl, have you got an update on that, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just checking I was mic on. Yeah, so so we, as the update says, we've done case studies for trust, people, digital, and estates. They're all done. I went through them yesterday. Perhaps the one thing we're struggling a tiny bit with is case studies for the sustainability strategy, because it does sort of a lot of things like that and that. So what we're probably going to suggest, Chair, is that we don't have case studies for the sustainability strategy, but they'll be embedded with all the other ones we've got. So that was that's where we've got to. So if the board are happy with the first 4, trust, people, digital, estates, they've done. I've been through them, and the suggestion is that we don't have specific case studies for sustainability, because it does go across and through everything. So that would be my well. So
what you say? Can I just check what you're saying, Carl? Is as we read the other case studies, we'll see the examples of the sustainability would be running through them.
Yes, yeah. We're trying to, because it's almost a framework within which we do other things. So yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. If the board are happy to progress in that way.
So I'm happy with that. Everybody happy with that as an approach? Yes, please, Stephen.
So just to remind me, Carl, what's the process for the board seeing those case studies? Are the documents coming back, or are we just going to have them distributed to us?
Well, what we're doing is getting the case studies finalised. Yep, thank you. Getting the case studies finalised. We've got an external company then putting all the documents together. So up to the board, really. I mean, I think the case studies should be fairly straightforward in what they're trying to achieve. So we could send them around for information if that would help. I don't suggest the board needs to approve them. I wouldn't have thought, but let the chairs.
But they were extremely helpful to us, because we did have a glimpse of some of them at the meeting in which we approved the strategies, and they were very helpful in illustrating exactly what the strategies are aiming to achieve. So yeah, I think just circulate them. Yeah, thank you. So I propose that we, oh, Stephen, thank you. Stephen Allen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just it would be helpful if we could have a copy of those to have a look at them before they're published. Would be really helpful to make sure that we can see how that all links together from a public point of view.
Yeah, we agree to that, Stephen. So we'll ensure you're on the circulation list. So we now come therefore to item 2 on the agenda, which is the consent items. And just to remind everybody, the consent part of the agenda considers routine committee business as a single agenda item, and members can ask for any items to be moved to the main agenda if a fuller discussion is required. I haven't had any request to do that yet, but if anybody would like to move anything out of consent into the main agenda, could you let me know now, please? Andrew?
And I don't know whether it needs to move, but I just wanted to comment on the NWSSP patient medical records case. It was just a comment, but it doesn't mean it needs to go to the agenda. I just wanted to have some assurance around this. So the title is the Brecon House Stores and Digital Scanning Accommodation. I just wanted to ask for information really about the digital scanning aspect. This was
Well, I was going to ask that same question, actually.
It's a case
So,
for more accommodation for paper, and I just felt that in 2022, I want, you know, with secure cloud
Particularly
storage.
for the live records,
Yeah.
when they're not digital. So
So
should you
I-
raise it when we come to that on the agenda? You know, I'll pull it out.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I wasn't sure whether it needed to, but it's.
I think
just-
it's a
just
question worth
really.
asking.
Yeah.
Don't answer it now. You've got another issue, have you, Matt?
Well, I don't think we're going to have the answer because this is shared services paper. I haven't got the detailed knowledge. I do know it is for paper record storage. I do not know what their digital strategy is. They have some digitization going on. I don't know how that's going to progress and escalate over the next few years. I can find out and come back to the board with a full brief.
So let's take it now then.
Sorry,
I was hoping we could have had this discussion when we got to the agenda item. So this refers to item 2.14, in which we have a business case which has already been subject to approval at Shared Services Senior Leadership Group and the Partnership Committee, and it requires approval by the Trust Board as we're required as the statutory authority to sign the lease for the additional accommodation. So the first issue is if people are content to approve the business case for the extension for 2 years and the dates that are included in the paper. And then the second point we have to, which I think is a perfectly legitimate point to raise, is, as Andrew said, in 2022, we should be moving towards digital storage of records. And I know that Cwmtaf have, for an example, have got a very extensive program towards digitizing their patient medical records. And as Matt has said, you don't have an answer to it because it's a shared services paper. I think it's perfectly reasonable that we ask them. It won't stop us, you know, approving this business case because the lease will expire, and we have to ensure that it goes forward. But I think it's a perfectly reasonable query to raise. Stephen.
Oh, sorry, Stephen.
Or Stephen Ham.
I do have a comment as well.
Steve Ham.
I was just going to suggest we ask them for an update. We send it out by email, and if we feel there's further discussion, we can bring it back to the board and ask them to come.
Doesn't stop us approving the case today, I think, but I think that's perfectly. Stephen, please.
Yeah, I guess my observation is that shared services, of course, don't set the strategy for digital scanning for Wales. It'll come through Digital Healthcare Wales. So they may respond to it. So I suppose the bigger question is, what is NHS Wales's strategy for scanning medical records, which I think is wider than shared services. They may be the agent,
but I don't think they'll actually set the strategy as such.
But many health boards, the several health boards in Wales have moved towards digitising records that are stored. Is that in the absence of many?
Oh, they
health-
have. There may be a strategy.
Okay.
I think that's part of what we need to establish is how does this fit, what strategy exists and how does this fit in to the national strategy rather than risk having shared services doing something separate to the national solution.
Okay.
Would be my suggestion. And notice as well, a lot of this is around GP medical record storage as well.
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Stephen. Matt?
So I think let's open it up. Let's get them to inform us how the context works, what the placement of this is, and then we can see where we get to after that.
Yep.
Well, and we bring it back.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Matt?
I was just going to say what Stephen said, the majority of the storage is for GPs. So obviously there's a cost to the GP of storing the records and digitization. So ultimately they are independent contractors. So there may be a strategy for digitization for Wales, but ultimately it comes out of their profits in terms of costs. So they will have a view also. So I'm just,
I'm sure they will. I'm of the view that it's a perfectly reasonable query to raise in 2022, and we should raise it.
I'm just saying it's not down to shared services. That's all as well.
Yeah, we've noted that. We noted that.
I think Gareth had a different item of consent. He raised his hand.
Gareth, is your hand up in relation to this item?
Yes, it is, Chair. I had similar concerns about how this sat alongside digitalisation strategy. And the other point I had also was that the cover paper appears to be silent regarding the cost of the preferred option and also the revenue generation that the preferred option will entail. So I wasn't able to find easily what the net cost was. And it'd be helpful if we're going back to shared services, if we could ask for the cover paper to contain that information as well.
It's in the business case, isn't it? In the detailed paper.
It takes a bit of finding in the business case as well. It's not easy.
Yeah. Okay. I could do that. Vicky? Thank you.
I think just to ask, because I think the summary paper wasn't clear for me unless we've actually been in the partnership committee about actually the date of the approval. So it says it's been through the senior leaders group and it's been through the partnership board. However, it doesn't tell us the date, so we can be clear, or the approval. So it would be helpful from a governance point of view to be clear about that.
We've got the dates of the leases ending and start and we need renewing, but you're talking about the actual partnership. Okay.
Yeah.
I was in the partnership committee last. I can answer that. I was in the partnership committee last Thursday.
Thank you.
And it was discussed there, Steve, was it? And approved. Okay. So with those issues, which is we will raise the matter of digitalisation for this purpose, mindful of the caveats that both Matt and Stephen Harris have reminded us of. We'll ask for the cover paper just to make it easy for us to see at a glance how much the spend is. I think it's 200,000 plus VAT, as my memory serves. And then the next thing I need to ask you to do is to approve this business case. Sorry, have I left out?
Nothing as such. So I was just reminding myself of the contents of the business case and just responding to Gareth's question. So I've had a look at the business case in section 4.2. Table 2 seems to set out the total cost of the procurement.
Yeah.
And it seems to suggest, if I'm reading it correctly, over 5 years, it's £3.5 million.
Over 5, yeah.
But we've been asked to approve this within the rules for up to £2 million value of procurement, according to the business case itself. So I don't know if that makes a difference, but I think I'm right in saying that the value of the procurement is the gross spend. It's not the net cost after income. It's got to be the gross spend, which, if I'm reading table 2 correctly, which I might not be, it's £3,578,630. So that is clearly over £2 million. Now I say, I don't know if that makes a difference because it references see it there, 250k to 2 million.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have to check this, see whether we can actually
200,000 is
approve
2
this
million, yeah.
as presented.
Steve?
Yes, we will have to check. Yes, we will have to check that. Because it wasn't an issue for the partnership committee, but yeah, we will have to check. So we can approve this subject to that confirmation.
Thank you, Stephen. So just summarising again, we've looked at the business case. We wish the question of digitisation of records to be raised with shared services, mindful, as I said, of the caveats that Matt and Stephen Harries have raised. We need to make the amount clear in the covering paper, as requested by Gareth, and we need to check the amount of 2 million and the consequences of that amount, which we'll do out of committee, Steve. Okay. Thank you. So if I can now, are there any other items on consent that anybody wants to bring out of consent into the meeting? Oh, I can. Gareth, is your hand still up?
Chair, it's a new point.
You're on mute now. Oh, there we are. You're back.
It's a new point, Chair, in relation to another item under consent, which is item 2.1.2. And the paper which has been presented in respect of this contract has been signed by Rachel Hennessy, and I think the requirement is that it is signed by a director. So it's a point of clarification, really, whether it ought to be a board director as opposed to the director of the Velindre Cancer Centre.
Thanks.
Lauren will answer.
Thanks, Gareth. The divisional directors and are included as sign off on these matters. I think the example we had before was was a deputy director level, but no. So Rachel and Alan can sign off the 100k papers, in addition to Carl, Kath, and myself, who are not executive board members.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Just need a few seconds. I've lost the function on my computer, which Lauren will help me to restore, I hope. I can't see. There was a separate column that came down there, so I can't scroll through the papers. No, it won't.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was item. Could you remind me of the number again, please? 2.1.2. Right, thank you. So, so Gareth, are you content with Lauren's response?
Thank you.
And Harris also has a question, Stephen.
So just on that, just for clarification, and again, we're looking at paper in 2.1.2, and I think you mentioned 100,000 delegated limit for Rachel, is that correct?
No.
Right. Okay, sorry, I misheard then, that's fine.
So are we content to approve 2.1.2? Okay, thank you. Almost afraid to ask. Any other items in consent that need to be pulled out? So I'll just go through the items quickly to note what we're doing. We've got the minutes of the Public Trust Board meeting held on the 26th of May, which is 2.1.1. can I just ask, are there any matters arising in those minutes which weren't covered in the action log that anybody wants to raise at this point? I'm assuming they're accurate minutes because nobody wants to pull them out, but just a chance if there are any matters arising anyone wants to raise. If not, we approve the minutes. And under 2.1.2, commitment of expenditure exceeding the chief executive's limit. 2.13 is the National Imaging Academy hosting agreement. That's for approval. To note, that's for approval. We've discussed 2.14, which is the shared services patient medical records business case, which was for approval. And then for noting, we've got the Transforming Cancer Services Programme Scrutiny Subcommittee highlight report from the 19th of May and the 21st of June, 2022. We note also the Transforming Cancer Services Communication Engagement update. We note also the Local Partnership Forum highlight report from the 5th of May, 2022 and the 5th of July, 2022. The 2.24, we note the Strategic Development Committee highlight report from both the 16th of May and the 7th of July 2022. Reminding colleagues that we had oral updates of the May meetings of these highlight reports, but the meetings were held a bit close to the board meeting for the actual written versions to come, but we did have feedback on the May meetings. 2.25, Welsh Health Specialised Services Committee, the Joint Committee briefing. We note that report. 2.26, the NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership Committee assurance report from May 22. We note that committee, that report. And then under 2.27, the approved policies update. And we're asked to note the policies that have been approved since the May 2022 board. Martin.
Just on those papers, there appears to be some duplication in the schedule. For example, Appendix 7 and Appendix 10 appear to be the same document.
Are you on the policies now, Martin,
Yes,
please?
Yes. Appendix 7 and Appendix 10 appear to be the same document. And there's also duplication with confidentiality, which is Appendix 5 and Appendix 8 appear to be the same document. So there's just a bit of duplication there.
It's 2.27. Let me just make sure I've got it up. So is this throughout, Martin, or just in particular ones?
Just the whole appendices, which are duplicates of each other.
Documents will be twice.
Oh. Are they? They're not on mine.
Appendix 5.
Confidentiality breach.
Appendix 8.
Yeah, okay. So there are some duplications in there, so we need to. Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, Chair, it doesn't affect the.
Doesn't
approval
affect
policy.
anything.
It's just the way that they're listed, there's some duplication.
That sometimes happens, you know, when you're uploading and new versions and things. So if we can just check we've approved the right version, make sure that the version we take out is the one that needs to come out.
They are identical.
They're identical, are they? Okay, so that's fine. We'll remove those. So that concludes the consent item. So any points to raise before I move on from that item? No, thank you. So we come to section 3 on the report, which is 3.10, the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. We have a presentation led by yourself, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Leanne is going to share the slides. Thank you, Leanne. So very pleased today to be bringing the first look for the board, really, of the Welsh Government Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. Colleagues may remember who were on the board over a year ago, we contributed to the national consultation exercise. There was a great deal of additional work carried out after that consultation exercise, which is why it took until June this year before the plan was published. So this is our first chance today as a board to see this. It's a short presentation. It's our first look, really, and there will be lots more opportunity to discuss and delve into more detail. So as I said, this was published in June. It marks a different approach for Wales moving us from a non-racist stance to an anti-racist stance quite clearly within the action plan. And it's also moved into, in terms of its title, from the Race Equality Action Plan, which was what was consulted on, to, as we can see now, the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. Also, very fundamentally, we are being asked to move away from using the acronym BAME in terms of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people to describing that in full when we actually talk about people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds. So that's very clearly something that we're asked to do as a result of the action plan. If we move now to the next slide, what we can see is some of the background here. So what we can see is that a great deal of work went on, as I said, and we don't need to really go into this in a huge amount of detail, just to understand that there's been a lot of stakeholder engagement, including many colleagues from across NHS Wales. When we look at the actual outputs then, the vision, purpose and values that we can see on the screen now, what we've got then is the vision that Wales is an anti-racist nation with a purpose to collectively make a measurable difference to the lives of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, and really exposing the values, as we can see there, of openness and transparency, putting people's lived experiences at the heart of the work we do, and adopting a rights-based approach. And of course, those values we can run through the services that we provide, and obviously the way we also treat our staff within the organisation. So they are completely at the heart of this work. The vision, purpose and values were widely welcomed in the responses to the action plan, but many people across the stakeholder groups did feel the timescales were ambitious. And really what the ambition is that we would start this journey within these 10 years, understanding that the level of cultural change necessary to fully embed this will take longer, but that these steps are a very, very important and fundamental first part in that. If we move on now then, what we need to know as an NHS organisation. So the action plan has specific actions for all of the Welsh Government policy areas, and of course health is one of those. So what I've done in these slides is just really pull out some of the key points for health and for us as Velindre University NHS Trust. There's a great deal more detail within the action plan itself, and colleagues are obviously, would encourage people to go and read the whole level of detail. What we can see here then is that it recognises the part that the NHS has got to play, both in terms of its staff, but also in terms of its part across NHS Wales in driving cultural change. If we can achieve that within our services, then that will help drive change in communities and far beyond health itself. What we can also see is that it makes a link between staff and citizens, and recognising is that if staff feel that they are valued and can be themselves and actually are not discriminated against, then that will obviously translate into how we deal with patients, with citizens, with donors throughout our services. And that's a fundamental part of what's at the heart of the NHS policy area within the action plan. If we move on now then to what we can see here in terms of priority action. So as I said, a huge amount of detail actually contained within the document itself. But what we've got are 5 priority actions. They're in these 5 areas. The one there that says not applicable, which is number 4, access to services, at the moment is written around maternity services. And as we don't actually deliver maternity services, that's not directly applicable to us. But clearly there are other elements underneath access to services which are not contained within the priority actions. If we move on now then to the first of the priority actions, and what we can see is that the goal there that the NHS in Wales will be anti-racist, will not accept any form of discrimination or inequality for employees or service users. And that's what I'm saying is that link between those 2 elements. And we can see a list here of some of the actions. I don't propose to read them out, you'll be glad to know. But I will just draw your attention to something additional to this, which is not on the slide, because under the area of leadership, just point out to colleagues that the chairs of all regulated bodies must ensure that every board member has a diversity and inclusion objective which includes anti-racism, and that has to be in place by summer 2023. So that's a specific thing for us. Obviously, that doesn't exist just within the health portfolio, but actually cuts across all regulated bodies. So specifically does relate to us as well. And also there's a suite of training for regulated boards to be commissioned and delivered. And that's something that Welsh Government are in train at the moment. There hasn't been any detail yet, but they are working on that. So we're in active communication with Welsh Government on when and how and what that will actually look like, which is very important. But I just point out there that the last item on this slide does appear to contradict that in terms of timescales. So what we're told under the general leadership duty is that there is, we have until summer 2023 to have that training commissioned and delivered. This slide says December 2022. So we're just getting some clarity on that, because it, to me, appears a little bit of a contradiction there, just in terms of timescales.
Could I ask you a question just on that point,
Yes, of
Sarah?
course.
Is this a specific commission programme? Because we spent a lot of time in a recent development day and so on. Is this something that we can arrange in-house through your department, or is this a specific?
This will be a commission by Welsh Government and actually sent out across all boards for regulated bodies. So what we need to do is to dovetail the work which we kicked off specifically for us with that work, so we're not duplicating and making best use of colleagues' time in the board. So I think there's a number of threads which are coming together, which may mean that we need to revisit what we originally planned, Chair. Okay, so moving on now then to the second goal. And what we can see here, lots of words on this slide. So again, don't propose to read this out. But the thing we'll pick up here is priority action 2 then, commission an independent audit of all existing workforce policies and procedures. And I'm on the working group with Welsh Government in terms of developing the commissioning process for that audit. This is something very importantly to look across the whole spectrum of, at the moment, the Welsh Government level policies, so things that are developed nationally in partnership and then introduced into organisations, of which we have a number. We're anticipating through that commissioning process that what we want to have at the end of it, an additional output to the audit, is a framework we can then adopt for our own locally developed policies, so that we have the same level of rigour in terms of our ability to look at those policies through the lens of anti-racism. So that's a very important piece of work that's just kicking off at the moment. Moving on now then to the next goal, priority action 3 sits under this goal here. And this is talking about, just take a tip. This is talking about the RES, which is the Workforce Race Equality Standard. So this says that we want to improve workforce data quality and introduce a workforce race equality standard. The RES has been in place in NHS England for a number of years, and we've never had that in Wales. And it's often been pointed out as a deficit really for NHS Wales. The working group on this was stood up about 7 months ago. So we've been working on the development of the RES in Wales in parallel with the continued work on the action plan. So this is quite far down the road, and what the decisions have been made that we will have all of the measures from England, but add additional measures for Wales, which we feel is appropriate. And clearly the development of the RES for us is a partnership between our data experts, our ESR experts, Welsh Government, ED&I experts, and then workforce experts as well. So together as a group, we've been working with Welsh Government on the development of that. So we're anticipating that will be visible to us in more detail by the end of this year, which is good news. We've also, in the development of our performance management framework in the trust, which as we know is going through its development or last development phases at the moment, we will plug the RES into our PMF when that's ready. So I've been talking to the performance team about that, so that we're ready for that actually when it arrives, and we can start to utilise that then to its full extent as a board, as committees, in order that we can see what that tells us. If we actually move on now then to the next goal. So priority action 5, where we establish a dedicated working group on health inequalities to address barriers in accessing services. So we're not yet sure what's going to emerge from this, and we do need to examine this in a lot more detail. Clearly, we have a role to play in terms of health inequalities, but as we know from other conversations around our public health responsibilities, that it may not be in directly delivering services in that way. But we need to examine that and pull clinical colleagues into conversations to understand how we can best utilise that. Then moving on again to the next slide, what we can see here is just the description really of some of the evidence units that are going to be involved in the overseeing of this work, and hopefully work with us as well to actually evolve our work. And then the last slide in terms of next steps. So what are we doing about this? There's a number of things clearly that we need to do. One of the first of those is to establish our own steering group. And that will help us and enable us to develop our action plan, which needs to be in place by the end of this calendar year. Andrew has gratefully agreed to be part of that group. So Andrew and I've had a conversation in terms of some potential for that. And we're in the process of establishing that at the moment. So there's lots and lots of things here that we need to do as an organisation, lots of opportunity for us, I think, to use the action plan as a platform to move us forward and to really embrace the equality, diversity and inclusion agenda through the anti-racist lens. That will also help us move forward in a number of other areas, of course, that we want to develop. So I'll stop there, Chair. So very happy to take questions or comments.
Thank you, Sarah. Very much. Very important item that we discussed this morning. We'll take questions. I saw your hand up first, Vicky, and then Martin, and then Andrew, and then Stephen. So.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Just a question, I guess, because there's a lot of work in here, isn't there? I fully support all of it, but actually in terms of governance, would appreciate perhaps working with Nick and Lauren just about the software business coming through QSP, because obviously the focus of workforce is through QSP, and we need to be clear that we're having regular updates in terms of all of the streams of work. So that would be great.
Yeah, thank you.
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sarah. Really helpful document. One of the things we talked about in our Velindre response to the consultation was around pushing to get a representative workforce. And we made the point that we should move away from the single route such as NHS jobs for recruitment. Has there been any progress in that area?
Thank you, Martin. In terms of nationally, there hasn't been specific progress. As part of our attraction retention work within the organisation, we are certainly going to pull all of the elements of this into that work so that we are exploring what we can do. We do know historically that the traditional route and the traditional job descriptions and the traditional way we advertise roles excludes many people who find that very, very difficult to navigate. And that's fundamental really to taking this approach forward. So thank you for raising that, because you're absolutely right. It needs to be embedded locally. It also needs to change nationally. And that's something that I'm working with. I'm the lead workforce director for ED&I, and actually it's something I'm working with colleagues across Wales to understand how we can best move forward on that element, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Andrew?
Thanks, Sarah. A suggestion, as well as all the good work in terms of workforce, I do feel that the new Velindre Cancer Centre presents an opportunity actually to showcase, to celebrate cultural diversity, and it's something that we have a unique opportunity to do. So I think we can link to Transforming Cancer Services programme and do something there as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, Carl, is yours in relation? No, okay, Stephen then, please.
Okay, thanks for that. Obviously, it's an important journey which we're going to take as an organisation, and we spend an awful lot of our money on staff and on service provision. But I'm also conscious we also spend a lot of money with external suppliers, particularly as we're hosting shared services. So I'm just interested alongside this, what is happening in terms of NHS Wales and I suppose testing compliance of anti-racism expectations with some of the major suppliers. Could we place tens of millions of pounds worth of work with some of these companies and businesses?
Yes, thank you, Matt. That's a really interesting point, an important point, isn't it, that we need to look through, because obviously procurement rules are based on legislation. This has now come in and is something that we need to enact across our system. So it's definitely something that we need to look at through this lens. So I will have conversations with shared services colleagues actually with that.
Thank you, Carl. And then I'll come to you. Carl's next, unless you want to respond specifically.
Yeah, it was just on that item.
Right, we'll respond on that item then.
So I work with Sarah and we make sure that that comes through the partnership committee for shared services. Wasn't on last time, Billy, make sure it's on next time, because the whole system needs to understand how shared services are going to respond for exactly, and there will be other things in there as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Right, Carl, finally.
And I put the mic on in time. So yeah, no, thanks, Sarah. I really welcome this. And just a couple of points to make. One, the trust strategy we approved not too long ago does articulate what type of organisation we want to be, and some of these growth measures are already in there. So I think this is really timely. Second bit, I think Sarah's point really, whilst this is an anti-racist plan, I mean, by its nature, it also picks up equality, diversity, all those other things, which I think will be really helpful. The third bit, I guess, is around our organisation, so national and regional, and a lot of our current locations are based, Andrew's point, really in and around Cardiff, which is a highly diverse sort of population. So I think, broadly speaking, we can make quite a big difference quite quickly in terms of some of this work, which will be really visible. And the last bit goes back to Sarah's earlier point on data. Data is everything, isn't it? Because it gives us the evidence base in which we start to make more informed decisions. So the quicker we can get really good data and insight, it's going to help the board to drive some of the things we might do in the future. So data is becoming an even more prominent theme, isn't it, through all of our discussions over the last number of months and years. So yeah, that's really good work.
Thank you, Carl. I can't see any other hands up. I'll just make one note. Just note that, of course, the diversity inclusion agenda includes the membership of this board, and I have had one conversation with public appointments, and I need to follow up on that, which I'll do shortly. Which is when we have a IM member to appoint, that I, as an individual, working with Lauren's office and Emma and others, we try very hard to contact relevant organisations to make them aware that this post has become available and that we would welcome applications. We go to the RNIB, we go to Race Equality, we within what I know about, we try very hard. And it would seem to me that this should be something that could be operated on an all Wales level. I'm not sure how efficient, how comprehensive, how thorough I'm being, and we are being, using our best offices to try and contact as many organisations and contacts as we have as possible. And I'd like to sort of just put note and recommend that the public appointments could perhaps do this on behalf of the whole of Wales. And maybe that we get better results, because despite our best efforts, we haven't recruited somebody from a Black and Asian ethnic minority group now for a little while. But I want to reassure the board it's not for the want of trying, and maybe there's a better way of getting out there to and if there are training issues for individuals who might be interested, then again that might be better if public appointments were to take the lead on that rather than individual organisations.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely, there are specific duties that here for in terms of leadership, which directly talk about board and board members and board makeup. So I'll talk to colleagues in Welsh Government about how they're interpreting that, if it does fall within that remit. Also, just thinking about Martin's point really around how we write these things and how we communicate them is key, isn't it? Because again, the person spec can be written in a way which excludes an awful lot of people. And if you're trying to increase the diversity of board membership, then that's key, isn't it? And we need to look at that in the same way as we're looking at policies through an anti-racist lens, we need to look at some of these other key processes and documents in the same way.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Sarah. Lauren?
Thanks. I mean, we've talked about this in other places, but just to make sure it's part of this conversation, that the role and the person specification for independent members, vice chairs and chairs is currently undergoing a thorough review. So there's another chair who's leading a task and finish group with various representatives on, and we're a fair way through that, hopefully concluding. It's been going through chairs groups and we'll be going through chief execs, etc. So and part of that has been very much in terms of through an inclusion lens, in terms of the language and the approach and the number of essential requirements and all that, all those elements. So it's just important to note as we're discussing the theme.
Thanks, Lauren. And I just wanted to say that it was in the context of that work, and we met as a chairs group with public appointments, that I raised the issues that I've just articulated. So that's great. So Martin, your hand just went up, and then Carl, please.
Just to make a point, I know it's not within this room, but of course, those chair and board members are indeed public appointments. They're Welsh Government appointments rather than in the gift of this organisation.
Yeah, for independent members, yeah, of course, but the exec is largely in our gift. Thanks, Martin. Carl?
Yeah, just 2 points. One, just to back up your comment around diverse organisations and boards, there's a weight of evidence from McKinsey which tells you diverse organisations deliver better results and boards. The second bit about, I guess, it's about recruiting people. What are the barriers to stopping people applying? So I'm thinking about from a digital perspective. So if we do some of this work more hybrid, you open up a whole different potential place to try and tap into talent. So, you know, is it always going to be the board has to be here? There's some things the board has to do in terms of walking the floor and everything else, but it depends on what's the future of work. Because if you have to be based an hour or two away from the organisation, that may be a barrier to applying versus if you have to be here. So it's about thinking about different solutions, I guess, in terms of going forward.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, fair points. Of course, we do have a number of our independent members who travel some distance to get to us, but the point is well made, Carl, nevertheless. I'm looking around to see, so that engendered quite an interesting debate, and I think you get the sense from the board, Sarah, that the board is full square behind you and supporting you in this work. And as we proceed, will that will be reported through QSP?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, Chair.
And we're going to the cycle of business as Vicky mentioned in negotiation with Nikki. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
So thank you, Sarah, for that, and thank you for the work that your leadership role across Wales in taking this important agenda forward.
Chair, can I come in, please?
Oh, sorry, Stephen.
Oh, Stephen, we just spotted your hand went
yes,
up.
no, it's been yeah, I know. Sorry about that. Just to pick up some of the issues, I'm more than happy to have a conversation outside the meeting. Obviously, we've had a similar issue with attracting members to community health councils across Wales for a number of years through the public appointment system, which is quite time-consuming and quite detailed insofar as how to fill a form in. And it may well be that some people need help and assurance and assistance doing that going forward, especially from underrepresented groups. As I said, more happy to have a conversation outside the meeting on that, Chair, but it may be helpful if those comments can be fed into the public appointment system sort of going forward.
Stephen? Steve, rather.
Yeah, just going to suggest that we pick that up with Stephen when we have our next quarterly meeting.
Yeah, should we pick up?
Yeah, an interesting connection to make and make sure we do have a learning. Stephen, we'll put it on the agenda for that session.
Sorry for calling you Stephen. It was probably only your mother called you that, was it?
It was, yes. I was thinking then I was probably in trouble.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was thinking. Probably spooked you then. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so item 4 on the agenda is the Chair's update report, which is quite a long report, which, you know, is indicated how busy we are. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but would just ask that you note the details of our board development sessions, because that's important that we do share with the public what our board development sessions contain. And they've included a number of initiatives which are about taking the trust forward, about organisational design and improving administration of boards and other committees. And to note also that we were joined by colleagues from Audit Wales, by shared services, and a number of other guests to ensure that we develop in a way which is outward looking as well as, you know, looking at ourselves. We invited others to look at us and comment. So I would like you to note what we've covered in our board development agenda. There's a lot that we've packed in there. And that's all I would want to say, really, unless anybody wants to raise any issues. We are inviting some of our catering staff to come to our next board development session to share some lunch with us. They really pulled out all the stops over the Jubilee weekend to make it as festive as possible for our patients and for our staff. You know, they even to the point of making the Jubilee pudding, and then making that available again for staff. They had a Jubilee tea for all our inpatients. So Sue and her team are going to come and meet us, and we can say thank you in person to them at our board development session. If there aren't any observations or queries, note that report, and I'm going to hand over to our chief exec to do his update. Steve.
Thank you, Donna. I think I will come to some of the items in the paper in a minute, but just want to highlight something which isn't in the paper, which you'll have seen yesterday, is that we made the formal announcement of the preferred bidder for the new Velindre Cancer Centre, and that is now out in the public domain. So a big step for us, and the winner for a record is the ACON consortium. We're clearly aware of as a board, and I'm really looking forward to working with Richard and the team as they mobilise properly around the next stages of the project and how we actually then meet up with our staff, patients, and with the community as well in terms of how we'll take that development forward. So a big step for us, and sets us on the next stage of our journey around that. Just a couple of things. COVID continues to have an impact. We're in another wave of COVID at the moment, and it seemed to come just within weeks after stepping down the arrangements. So I'm well aware, as we all, the emotional impact of that on people, because we'd suddenly gone from having masks in all our locations to no masks, and then back within about 2 or 3 weeks. So the emotional impact of that on everybody in what is a very difficult circumstance anyway, it's hard, and we need to continue to support people through that. We're really pleased to see that our IMTP has been approved. There's a conditions letter which I've received, it's referred to in the paper, and we'll be, I use the royal we, Lauren was away, we'll be picking up and working through the process in which we will monitor against those conditions, and we bring that back to the September board for everybody's citing. Were you aware? And I think, Donna, you were going to send out the conditions letter to the IMs.
I'll send it out to the IMs later today.
The only other thing I think I'd pick up is just to welcome Carl Taylor to the fold. 3 weeks in, I saw him yesterday with Carl. Carl's shoulders looking a little less tense now. He's got the chief digital officer, our chief digital officer in place. I'm really looking forward to working with Carl in the future, and looking forward to his leadership and support in terms of how we take our digital strategy forward. But I'll stop at that point. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, I'm waiting for people to raise hands if they want to. I've already sent Carl a diary request in case I don't get on his induction program. So just letting you know that, Carl. Oh, 2 Carls. We're going to have as many Carls as many Stevens now. And I just want to note my, well, thank ourselves as a board, because we developed the IMTP together as a unitary board, but to note our pleasure that that has been approved, albeit with, the accounting officer letter's got some requirements of us. We've got, again, another year with an approved IMTP. Steve, thanks to you and your colleagues for all the hard work that's got, and Carl and your team with Phil and so on. It's no mean feat. It's a tricky, difficult endeavour, because you're juggling things, the unknowns with the knowns. Best interests of our patient population at the core of what we're trying to do. It's not an easy thing to put together, and I want to note my pleasure really that for another year again we got an approved IMTP.
Thank you, Donna, and we'll pass on back to the teams as well, because it's really important. The special prize was yesterday at the Exec Management Board. We were discussing the timetable and process for next year's.
So the ink's not dry on this one yet.
Cycles work. And,
so does anybody have any queries for the Chief Exec on his report? Can't see any hands up electronically. Okay, so we come to item 5 on the agenda, which is an important section of the agenda, and it's a long section. We've got a number of annual reports. Nicola, you'll be leading the presentations here and then drawing in your team as required. I'll leave that bit of chairing to you to do. I just would like to note that these reports have been through Quality Safety Committee, so it would be really helpful if those introducing the reports could make reference to what was discussed and agreed at the Quality and Safety Committee, please, if that's okay with you, Nicola. And I'll hand over to you.
Of course, Chair, thank you. So I am going to hand over to my esteemed team who have worked really hard to pull these reports together, and I'll just pick up any points at the end. So firstly is the Putting Things Right annual report, and Nigel Downs will present the highlights from that report.
Hi, thanks Nicola, thanks Chair. Good morning, Board. As Nicola said, the Putting Things Right annual report is before you. It's been endorsed by EMB, the Executive Management Board, on the 1st of July, and also, as Chair said, at Quality, Safety and Performance on the 14th of July. The report is voluminous and as I say, is presented to you today. It's just some quick highlights from me, and as Donna mentioned in relation to things that, as Chair mentioned in relation to things going forward, I would also add that. So we received 190 concerns, as you can see, in the highlight report on the second page, and it's of those 150 were managed as early resolution and 40 managed under Putting Things Right, or PTR, and that is a 32% increase in the concerns that were managed as early resolution, which is a really good way of going forward. That's what we are looking for, is positive ways of demonstrating quicker responses to the people who raise concerns, because if we can do that, then it's getting an outcome for those people at an earlier stage. We've also, as I think you may be aware, we responded to 70% of PTR concerns within 30 working days during the year. That's the totality. Now that is slightly below what our Welsh Government target is. However, that was during the time of the COVID pandemic, and there was delays in relation to that. However, as you can see from the report, compliance did improve, and they improved during quarters 3 and 4, and that was due to enhanced divisional ownership. So that's Velindre Cancer Centre and Welsh Blood, and utilising enhanced systems and processes. And at the end of that period, we were at 100% of getting our responses from the PTR perspective within the 30 working days. So we got back up to a place of normality and more of a better place for our patients and families who are raising concerns. And then also we only had 2 concerns which were reopened as the complainants, or by complainants rather. And that was because of dissatisfaction with our response. And if you look at the numbers, there's 190 concerns, only 2 being reopened for any sort of queries or further questions. Again, that is an excellent response. It's just around about 1%, as we can all work out. So I'll pause there, Chair, if that's okay with you, for any questions. Oh, sorry, before I do, there was one other last thing, which was in relation to how we present or look to present in the future. and that came out of the Quality and Safety Performance Committee, and it was in relation to understanding or comparing with other positions of other organisations, whether they are similar, and we are investigating and looking how we can sort of compare ourselves at Velindre and University NHS Trust with other organisations, either of a similar ilk or size. And I'll pause there. Thank you, Chair.
When you do this bit of benchmarking, Nigel, the big health boards get in excess of 600. Sorry, Nigel, I was talking without my mic on. So thank you for that. I was just going to say to you that when you do the benchmarking work, which we've asked you to do in quality and safety, you will have to get some statistical advice for that, because in any quarter, in one of the larger health boards, they're likely to get in excess of 600 complaints a quarter. 700 complaints a quarter, and we are getting 190 in a year. So in order to compare apples and not to be comparing apples and pears, you need to get a bit of, perhaps you might need a bit of stats advice. And if you already know what to do, apologies for suggesting that. But otherwise, we will make ourselves look much better than we are, but we won't have compared it appropriately because the I want us to be as best as we can be, of course, but the health boards, as I say, get about 700 complaints a quarter. I'm looking, Vicky, please, and then Hilary.
Thank you. I just wanted to commend the annual report, but I think particularly as we did in QSP, highlight what's on page 16 in terms of the learning, because that's a really key bit out of this report. And I just think the way that the sort of boxes which highlight some of that learning is really helpful in this report. So just commend the board to have a look at that, because it's a really great summary.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. It's a very easy report to follow. I agree. Hilary, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Nigel. It is a good report. One thing for me that would make it even better is if we were able to give the statistics as to how many people we've seen or how many people we've treated. So it's 160 or 50 or whatever cases, but out of how many contacts, because it's probably runs into the 1,000. And then that would give us a comparison.
One of the ways in which we're going to be able to compare ourselves with the boards, because they would get 600 complaints over a huge number of contacts, and we get 190 or something out of, and that might be the way in which we compare both by looking at number of contacts and a number of complaints, and then we'd be able to make an appropriate comparison with other organisations. I know you've got your hand up, but I think Nick wants to come back on that point.
Yeah, thank you. And we will, the benchmarking we've undertaken is through the annual reports that we published on the Health Board's website. So it would be very dependent on what information is available. But what we will do going forward for our quarterly reports, and then for next year's annual report, we will add that contextualisation in each report as we go through.
Excellent. That's excellent news. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick, very much indeed for that. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. As you mentioned, there was a much longer and more detailed discussion at QSP, but I'm just wondering, Nick, it might be helpful in terms of assurance for the board. One thing we touched on is almost like the triangulation or the identification of patterns within an organisation, in that obviously we treat each concern as the concern, but there may be occasions where perhaps patterns are emerging. I know we discussed at QSP, but just perhaps a brief assurance to the board or comment to the board about how those things are identified, whilst recognising each concern is an individual and needs to be treated as an individual.
Absolutely. And Quality and Safety Committee earlier this year commissioned a more detailed deep dive piece of work in relation to concerns for us to really understand the high level themes, and if colleagues will recall, communication was the critical area, and we actually looked down to an individual practitioner level, and then fed that back within both divisions, and there were further sort of discussions with teams there, and we have seen a slight change in themes following that. So it's really important, because if you just look at it per quarter, it doesn't actually, because the numbers are so small, it doesn't really tell you the whole picture. So yes, we do keep an overview of that and have undertaken deep dives. The plan, when we come on to the quality framework discussion later on, is that once we will establish our hubs, and we'll be establishing an operational quality governance group. And one of the critical aims of that group is to undertake that triangulated governance across a number of factors, including concerns, incidents, health and safety issues, etc., and do that more granular detail on a regular basis. So that will really further enhance how we do that. So rather than it being just one-off exercises, it'll become part of how we work.
Okay. We're asked to approve this report. So, board, do we approve this report? Thank you. And the next item, which is 5.20, thank you, Nigel, for that, is Patient and Donor Experience Annual Report.
Thank you,
So I think,
Chair.
Nick, you're going to do this one.
Yeah, so Nigel will come in on this one as well, as Nigel was the co-author of this report. So again, it's a rapidly developing area for us as a trust, and lots of work happened, and some really more detailed plans for the forthcoming year to really increase the amount of feedback we are having as an organisation. It's really important that the experience of our donors, our patients, are threaded through all decisions we make and everything that we do as an organisation. But I'll hand over to Nigel, we'll cover the highlights. But one of the key features for this year is really how we do that en masse, and then again capture the contextualisation of the feedback in relation to numbers of contacts. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Board. In relation to this report, as you can see from the cover paper, it was endorsed by Executive Management Board on the 1st of July and at QSP on the 14th of July, as already been mentioned. The highlights are for this paper. Again, it's quite a voluminous and comprehensive paper for you, and discussion was had at the Quality, Safety and Performance meeting on 14th of July. The highlights are at the bottom of page 2, top of page 3 from the Velindre Cancer Centre and Welsh Blood perspective. The score where it says 70% of patients scored their experience as excellent. That's actually 10 out of 10. And if you look at the graph, which is graph 8, I believe, on page 15, the scoring for VCC is actually 96% for the overall scoring of 8 out of 10 or more, which is incredibly commendable. And if you looked at, I'm sure, and we will be looking at perhaps similar organisations across Wales and the wider field, in that score, I should imagine is rivaled by everybody who would, other organisations who would look at it. The other things from a Velindre Cancer Centre is that 91% of patients stated they were always felt cared for. And again, if you look at the graphs between pages 13 and 15, it's 99% who were satisfied at least with their care for that, and 90% felt they were listened to. And again, it was 98% felt listened to sometimes or always, and there was only 1%, I think, was from a negative type comment, or one person from a negative comment. And then 75% always understood what was happening regarding their care and treatment. Again, likewise, that is in the 90s when you go down one level. At Welsh Blood 2, they had 80% of donors rated their care as 6 out of 6 or excellent. So again, a fantastic achievement for our Welsh Blood colleagues. Total appointments booked was 17,553. So we do have some numbers in relation to that. And then Community Partnership Officer continues to make strong strategic relationships across Wales, for example, with the Football Association of Wales for JD Cymru Leagues and Orchard Welsh Premier Women's League for the 2021-22 football seasons, and that's in relation to the patient and donor experience. I'll pause there, Chair, for any questions or comments, and as you said last time, this paper is or report is for approval by yourselves.
Stephen, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just an observation I want to make at the board, which is an observation made at QSP regarding the what sound like very good outcomes in section 3.1. The for example, Velindre Cancer Centre, where 70% of patients score their experience as excellent, 9 out of 10. 91% of patients state they always felt cared for. Obviously, you'll recall the observation I made at QSP is you can completely repackage this, as 30% of patients didn't score as the experience as excellent. 9% of patients didn't state they always felt cared for. 10% of patients didn't always feel listened to, and 25% of patients didn't always understand what was happening. So I'm just observing that how these things are presented almost subconsciously creates our own reaction. So these are, I'm sure, very good outcomes, but repackaging them the other way, perhaps they're not. So as I say, that's not a criticism of anybody or even how this is presented. And obviously we can be very pleased in this, but there are still things I'm sure we can work on. And I'm just very intrigued about, you know, the default is always to package it as this is, you know, the good side of the outcome rather than the less good side of the outcome. And we did discuss this at QSP, but I just want to just mention this at the board because I think it's an important point as this is a public document.
Absolutely right, Stephen. If you remember, Nigel, we were saying that 75% being satisfied means 1 in 4 people, potentially means 1 in 4 people are not satisfied. So
can I come back in, Chair?
Yeah, of course, please.
In response, and Stephen, I know we did have a dialogue on the day in QSP, and it was great to get your feelings in relation to it. But if you do actually look at the numbers, it's in graph 8, as I alluded to, on bottom of page 15. And if you look at the available answers, it's a scoring system from 0 to 10. And if you look from 8 to 10, which I would say are the higher level or higher number of scoring, is that if you add up the 69, the 18.46 and the 18.05, as I've done, it comes to something like 96.09 or 96.1. And so we're scoring 96.1 above 8 out of 10. And if you look at the lower numbers, there's not many people out there. There's a total of 600, call it. Those numbers are not very often much. I would totally agree, and obviously we would totally agree in relation to this, that one person saying that they're not happy or satisfied with our care is one too many for us. But that is definitely something that as a trust we are working towards, and the Cancer Centre and Welsh Blood are also working towards. This is obviously in relation to BCC, but just to give some assurance around it.
Oh yes, I have. It's 12. I just saw it there. So a way to present this would be if you were to say 90 or whatever 6% of patients always or usually, and I'm not quite sure what the difference between always and usually is, but if you present it as 96% of patients always or usually, then that gives us a bit more assurance. And if you put that in the narrative, we don't have to necessarily dig through it in the graphs.
Chair,
So
apologies for that.
No, we're all on a journey together. I don't have to apologise at all.
It's a score of 8 out of 10. 96% scored 8 out of 10, which I think is quite high.
Yeah, I'm okay. Nick, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think you made a very valuable point, Stephen, and it is, you know, you can always slice and dice the information. And we are benchmarking with colleagues across Wales in respect of their annual reports as well, to look at, well, how do we compare, albeit it's not really comparable, but I think from that perspective, what is really important with all of this is, are we listening to what our patients and donors are saying, and are we doing something about that? And what is the culture at a service delivery level in relation to listening to that feedback and having the discussion with the teams and saying, well done, this is really good. However, you know, we didn't quite get it right there. Why do we think that is? So that is the work that's happening currently. It's, you know, it is happening in some areas. You know, we need to get, you know, how we doing boards up in our clinical areas, that we feed it back. Please give us feedback. This is what you've told us. This is what we've done. And it's really, really important that we can demonstrate from the outpatient clinic level up to the senior leadership team in the Cancer Centre or Welsh Blood and up to the board, that we are learning and that our themes are changing within individual services and departments. I've been to the senior leadership team in the Cancer Centre. We've had that discussion, and they're working with the managers to make sure, because having the Civica, the electronic patient feedback system, is new to the cancer centre. It gives real-time feedback and real-time opportunities to nip things in the bud if there are little bits of things that are not quite right for our patients. So, but really, because this is why we're doing it, isn't it? It's really, really important. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Nick. Vicky?
I think it's just building on that conversation, because Nick and I did a 15-step challenge on Tuesday, and some of the issues that come up in terms of feedback are actually themes, aren't they, Nick? So one example was transport that people weren't happy with. As a board, we need to understand those themes that come out, and so actually some of those direct conversations are really important to be able to understand the nuances of that. So it's just to add to that comment.
So thanks, Vicky. Stephen Allen was next, and then Jazz. I can't see any other hands up.
Thank you, Chair. Just going to reiterate what was said by Nicola then, was that although you may have had some figures which are sort of not high numbers, and obviously Nigel, thanks for the report, really easy to read, to be honest with you. I think it's what's not annotated within the report is how you're dealing with those levels of feedback which were not with sort of people who marked you not providing that level of support. I think it's what's not in the report is how you're dealing with that, and maybe that's what's missing. But I think it's sort of demonstrated then what you're doing based on that feedback, how you're going to respond to that, and how you're going to go back and sense check that in the future would be really helpful going forward.
Yeah, Nick's agreeing with that, Stephen. So that will be taken forward. Jazz?
Thank you. I mean, it follows a little bit on what we've been saying already. I just wanted to remind us how important, how powerful this data is really in influencing the way our staff respond and behave. So it's the conversations that we now have with our staff groups to say, and people are completely engaged in this, you know, patient feedback, donor feedback is the thing that we're most interested in. So, and actually people want to see 100%. I mean, I think our figures are fantastic at 96 point whatever it is, 0.4%. But there's always the question of where did we, you know, what can we learn? And it's how we take this back to our staff now to interact and improve, which follows on Stephen's challenge, which is the key thing. But I think people are up for it. So it's really helpful data for us to go away and shape our service on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jazz. That's really helpful. I'm looking around. I can't see any other hands up. So, Nick, I presume that in future reports you might put something, expand a little bit more on your response to some of the figures. So we're agreeing that, and I'm asking the board to approve this annual report.
And we'll ensure that the divisional reports that come to Quality and Safety and Performance Committee going forward cover that in detail as well, because they report their experiential feedback when they present the papers to the board, to the Quality, Safety and Performance Committee, so they can make sure they are included.
Thank you, Nick. So the next item is 5.3.0, which is the trust-wide nurse staffing levels 2016 Act annual report. So this report is in response to a legislative requirement. So it's important to note that context. And I think, Nick, you're introducing this.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, really pleased as the responsible officer for the Nurse Staffing Wales Act for Velindre Trust to present last year's annual report. Anna Harries is here with me. She's our Senior Nurse Professional Standards and Digital. And Anna will cover this summary. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you, Chair. So this report has previously been approved at EMB and QSP. This is a slightly altered report template to what you might have seen in previous years, but this is an All Wales template which required following. So the annual report is an Act requirement, and now that first floor ward are a 25B reporting area from April 2021, this was obviously now one of those requirements. Prior to that, these reports have been submitted, but obviously not part of that requirement. So there are systems that you can see detailed in the cover paper there that actually aid the compliance of data collection and the accuracy of that data collection to give that compliance. So the health roster allows accurate staffing data to be entered, and quite easily actually, instead of counting it off paper documents. The acuity reviews as well, which are completed daily now within first floor, even though the national audits are just 2 months within the year. You've also got the establishment reviews, which are now established quite well within the organisation, where we go through biannually all areas of nursing, not just first floor, which has the Act requirement. So this is all detailed obviously within the papers. No comments were received from the previous boards, but you will note that the planned roster was not met on occasions, but this was deemed safe and compliant due to the reduced bed numbers and patient numbers with that capacity. So you'll see those numbers in that table. The template cannot suit Velindre really in some circumstances, because there's big sections in there that refer to paediatrics or surgical. So to make it easier, I have greyed out those areas so it's easily identified which sections are applicable to us. There's excellent data in here that obviously details complaints. There's only one aspect in there that's detailed complaints to previous years, because everything has always been recorded as 0. But that's because there's a slight change in how we're reporting. So there's 5 complaints in there with relation to nursing. But then as you see, go down the table, it's how many of these incidents were actually about nursing levels, of which these were 0. Shall I stop there, Nicola?
Thank you, Anna. Yeah.
Thanks,
so
Anna.
The only thing for me to add is really important section under 3.1 in the highlight report, which is that there were no incidents that occurred on the ward as a result of nurse staffing levels, and we have got a legal duty to record any that may occur, and just to say that the overarching responsibility is for us to have regard to providing sufficient nurses in all settings, not just the first floor ward, and hence why we do the twice a year establishment reviews. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. That's very helpful final comments there. Are there any, Martin, please?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report, which is very helpful to understand, even though, as you said, it doesn't exactly fit our needs. Just to pick up the specifics in terms of at all times, the staffing levels of the first floor ward is appropriate. But a couple of times it says the staffing planned roster wasn't met, but was appropriate. And that was because of reduced numbers. Is that, in terms of trying to cut to that, is that luck that we didn't have that many patients on the ward, or is that actually managed to ensure that we didn't, so we had appropriate levels? Which way around did it happen? Is it chicken or egg?
I think it's probably a combination of both, because if you have unforeseen sickness, then despite best efforts, sometimes you cannot always get cover. But what the cancer service does, probably more so than other places because of its size, is redistribute resources from within. So it's not uncommon for a senior nurse, for example, to be putting an apron on and going to support the ward if there is increased activity or demand. Because you cannot always get temporary staff. I think most of it is probably planned, if I'm going to be honest, and that is, we have had reduced bed numbers, we because social distancing, and what we will have been able to do is to actually use some of our first floor ward staff who are, for example, chemotherapy trained, to go and support delivery chemotherapy where we have got, where we look at our staff patient ratio and we are able to support that happening. But, we have got, we do report on the data system across the cancer service, circumstances where we do not have sufficient staff to cover the demand. We've not had any of those for the first floor ward, and we are in the process of implementing a different module of the health roster system called Safer Care, which will allow that to be captured automatically, but that's a national improvement that's not quite available to us as yet.
Thanks, Nick. I recognise this is only a snapshot of one part of the overall nursing cohort here. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Vicky?
I think it's just to raise also, Nicola, because there was national guidance during COVID, wasn't there, in relation to staffing that was UK-wide, that obviously recognised the challenges that all organisations were in, and that obviously influences your daily review.
Yeah, that's right. And we have, throughout the pandemic, flex staff to ensure we'd at the, meeting the greatest need at that particular point in time.
So thank you for that observation, Vicky. I can't see any other hands up, so we're asked to approve that report. Everybody content to approve the nurse staffing levels report, annual report? Thank you. And so now we come to 5.40, which is the safeguarding annual report. Nick.
Thank you. My colleague Tina Jenkins will provide the highlights of this, and board will see that this is a slightly different report than previous years, because we have recognised the sort of broader context from within which we should be operating, ensuring that the vulnerable adults agenda is also picked up, and we have enhanced what was previously our safeguarding and public protection management group to include vulnerable adults as well. So I'll hand over to Tina. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you, Chair. So like Nicola said, it's the biggest change to this report this year, because I think this is our 4th safeguarding annual report from the safeguarding that was Safeguarding and Public Protection Management Group, which is now the Safeguarding and Vulnerable Adults Group, which is trust-wide, has extended our terms of reference to measure self and provide assurance against dementia, learning disabilities, other areas of vulnerability. And underneath that group now we've established a trust-wide safeguarding supporting vulnerable groups forum, where we look at emerging themes and new things that have come out and new assurances, so we can report to the safeguarding group any work that we do in. So that work is really starting. So as one of the highlights of the report, we have started that work this year, and that's included in the report, some of the things that we have done, but it definitely forms quite a big part of next year's work plan of how we take that forward. So that's one of the highlights, really. What we looked at doing this year was a training needs analysis trust-wide, so we could be really clear where we were with our safeguarding training and that we were reporting accurately. I think this year was seen as a bit of pandemic recovery, even though we don't feel like we're in recovery because we had the second wave, which had an impact, was making sure that people understand the fundamental practice of safeguarding, so getting key messages out there, developing different ways of sharing information and getting to staff, because there was a lot of high profile cases as well last year in the media around how the pandemic had impacted on safeguarding, especially children, but from what I'm seeing now as adults as well. And some of the reviews that are coming out now are certainly COVID has had a real impact on the ability to protect people. So we really wanted to work on getting key messages out there the best way we could. A lot of what we did was preparation for the liberty protection safeguards, and there's a bit of information in the report around what we've done to try to get ready for something that we haven't yet got a date of it being launched, but we've been trying to do what we can with the information that we know. We've continued to make reports and work with our multi-agency partners and challenge decisions if appropriate. And there is some data in the report about our reporting, which in comparison to if you compared it to other health boards data, seems like really low reporting data, but there's a lot of involvement and a lot of information that gets shared for us. And it's difficult sometimes to evidence the complexity we have around working with all different multi-agency partners across Wales, not just one local authority area or one regional safeguarding board area. So some of that information is in the report. and how we've continued to provide safeguarding supervision to staff. You know, safeguarding is a really emotive subject, and even looking at the safeguarding data doesn't necessarily, it doesn't capture the impact that it has on people or the difference it's made to people. So we've continued to do that across the Cancer Centre and Welsh Blood. So looking forward, really, what we're hoping to do is really develop the role of the safeguarding champion. We've put together a development plan and what is a champion framework, but trying to really embed that and hopefully having a bit more flexibility in teams to be able to release staff to do that if we do get some, you know, some respite from the pressures that COVID has caused. Continue with, you know, making sure we accurately reporting that data around training and finding out what everybody needs. And then responding to the liberty protection safeguards and really trying to embed some of that work we're doing around the wider vulnerable groups as a bit more of a proactive, you know, safeguarding response, isn't it? Making sure that we're supporting the people with the most needs. So happy to take any questions.
Martin, you've got a question. I have one, and then well, I'll do Martin, Andrew. Okay, Martin, you first.
Again, thanks, Tina. Really good report to read. One thing that caught my eye was section 3 at the bottom of page 8. It says over the year, the Trust's matrix score reduced, identified the work as required to improve the Trust DBS checking position. Then the table just below that says action needs to be taken to ensure that the staff have appropriate checks. Just to say that the end column says completed, so that risk has been dealt with and now everyone is properly DBS checked where appropriate.
Yeah, so there was, we actually had internal audit that did a report, which was looking at our processes. And the process we had, because we did identify that we needed to do some work around our current staff DBS check. And there was substantial assurance about our staff checking at this point in time. There was some work that needed to be doing around DBS sort of policy development and ensuring that we're doing the right thing going forward. But for our current position, there was substantial assurance through that audit report that our current workforce is checked to the appropriate level. I think the next stage is, which is a bit of a national issue, is deciding how often they should be checked and whether or not we should be signed up to update services. But that's an NHS Wales challenge, really, not just a Trust challenge.
Perfect. Thank you, Tina. Thank you.
No problem.
Andrew.
Thanks. Really good report. In the same section that Martin was referring to, section 3, compliance with safeguarding maturity matrix, the sentence at the bottom of page 8 of the report doesn't quite make sense. It's a minor point. It says that the matrix improvement plan was submitted to the NHS safeguarding network in November 22. I think that should say was submitted in November 2021. It's just just a little bit confusing, so just to tidy that up, but it's a very good report.
Nope. Oh, thank you. Can I just confirm, what page did you say that was so I can amend it?
It's the bottom of page 8 of the report. In the IBABS pack, it's page 12, but it's page 8 of 27 on the report.
No problem. I'll get that amended before if it's approved and before it goes for publication. Thank you.
I can't see. Oh, Stephen.
So again, it's a quick question, really. Actually, on the probably not for you, maybe for Carl. So I'll put him on notice now. Is that the very last page, the very last row of the table? There talks about required improvements in line with the dementia-friendly hospital charter. So obviously that, I'm guessing, is referring to work to be done on the existing cancer centre. So turning to Carl now, I just trying to understand, Carl, how those sorts of requirements are being fed or will be fed into the process for the final design of the proposed new cancer centre. Thank you.
Yeah, two things. What we do is, at some point in these board meetings, I will get the idea to turn the button on. I apologise.
Yeah, you and me both.
I think the first thing is, what are we doing in the existing cancer centres, and as much as possible in terms of the capital programme. So the second bit, all of the current and expected legislation, both in terms of this and various other requirements, have been part of that process from the get-go. So wherever we get to, we will be up to speed with the existing legislation, but also with an eye to the future as well. So I think that's really important for the board to take assurance from. Yeah.
Did you want to come back on that, Tina? Can I
It
see
was
your
just
hand
for some assurance really, and that I will be getting in touch with Carl and his team, because one of our plans, one of the actions on our work plan as the Supporting Vulnerable Groups Forum for the Trust, is to make sure that we liaise with, you know, the Transformer Cancer Centre and Cancer Services and the new build to ensure that the environments are appropriate right from the very beginning, you know. So we're looking at trying to improve and try to create dementia-friendly environments in our current hospital, and looking at what work that needs to happen there in the current cancer centre, but also ensuring that anything is included into the new build at the earliest stage, really, isn't it, to think about that when the build happens. So it is an action for me to try to link up with someone on that team. So who would be the best person for me to speak to, Carl? Because that is on my to-do list.
David in the first instance, Tina, David Powell.
Yeah, no problem. I've got David's contact details, so that's great. So I'll do that. So we can work on that together, hopefully, because it's much better if we could do it right from the outset, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So I've got a general question, Tina, which you might be able to answer for me. Dementia and learning disability is covered. And that's in relation largely to cognitive impairment. I'm just wondering about mental health in general, and the vulnerability associated with people. They may not have cognitive impairment of any sort, but they've got mental health issues.
So I think what we're trying to achieve through that group, and what we've been looking at, is for our work plan, I suppose this year we were focusing on the dementia work and the learning disability standards, because there was new things that had been published that we were trying to measure ourselves against. But certainly within the Cancer Centre, I've worked collaboratively with the supportive care team and the teams around homelessness being a big issue, mental health problems. So we will be trying to pull all that work together. From a Welsh Blood perspective, we've been trying to use the opportunities around making every contact count. And we've post-pandemic, we had a lot more people disclosing to our teams about they were struggling with their mental health. So looking at how we can signpost with people and working with some of the suicide prevention teams really about anything that we can do. So we are really trying to look at where we can join that up and how we can work with the health boards at sort of opportunities to try to support people's mental health where we can. But that is kind of where our priority was with the learning disabilities and dementia. But it certainly is part of the group to look at that as well, where we can make contacts and support and be involved in wider initiatives, wider than the trust, that we might be missed out of because we're not a health part of the health board.
I think that's a very helpful answer. Nick, if I can look to you, I think this is something that I know how hard that you've worked to get the learning disability and dementia, and I don't detract from that for 1 minute. Excellent. But I think general mental health, we do have to make sure that we're covering off those issues as well. And just wonder if I can ask you how you might work with Tina and the team to take that forward.
Yes, so as Tina's described, I think there are some plans there. What I'd also like to do is link in with the psychology teams and to have some further discussions. So leave us take that away, Chair,
Okay.
and we'll work up a firmer plan incorporating, mental health as well. Clearly within our role as an organisation, because but we will often be, I think some of our patients in the cancer service, are really struggling.
Yeah.
And there are, some of our safeguarding issues actually relate from things like that. But we'll formulate a plan. And as Tina said, also we are picking up in the blood service more concerns being disclosed to our teams there than maybe would have previously.
Thank you, Nick. I think that would be very helpful, Steve, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I can't see any other hands up, so we're asked to approve the safeguarding annual report. So, colleagues, do we so approve? I think that's a yes. Thank you. Thank you, Tina. Then 5.5 is the infection prevention and control annual report. Is Mohammed presenting this, Nick?
Yes, I think Yazin is joining us, Nigel, is he?
He's not feeling 100% well today, so he's here for questions, if that's okay, Nicola and Chair, and I'll present the paper. Is that okay? But he will certainly, he is here for questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Great,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Over to you then, Nigel. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much. So the report is there in front of you, and as you can see, it's been endorsed by the Infection Prevention and Control Management Group on the 19th of May, the Executive Management Board on 1st of July, and QSP on the 14th of July. The report has been, well, the period is over a difficult year, obviously, because we've had COVID-19 continuing, where we've had second, third, subsequent, I don't know how many waves we're on at the moment, and if anyone does know, please could they email me that response, because I seriously don't know where we are in relation to it. However, that has not only affected the normal working of the trust and our organisation, our divisions within the organisation, but it's also heavily affected, as you could imagine, the IP and C team. And so I would like to thank them personally for that in relation to the work that they've carried out. However, they've also worked with other key stakeholders internally within the trust and externally with our partners across Wales and Welsh Government in relation to devising pathways, safe systems, so that we can allow our trust to be able to provide the core services that it does to our patients and donors, both in Welsh Blood and Velindre Cancer Centre. But obviously it has had a major effect on it. So in relation to some of the other things that they've been doing, they've also overseen education guidelines practice to ensure that the IPC and infection, well, they do prevent as many infections as possible, and that is minimised within our trust. And some of the highlights which are in the cover paper and also within the first few pages of the report relate to, again, the continuing MRSA bacteremia, where we've had no cases of MRSA bacteremia since November 2013, and that certainly is to be applauded. They've also had Klebsiella, no Klebsiella cases within patients, Pseudomonas, no cases within inpatients, catheter-associated urinary tract infections, no cases, and there's been no influenza outbreaks, and I know that's a pattern across Wales, not just within our organisation. So obviously social distancing and the wearing of masks do work to a certain extent, I'm sure, because otherwise, but we don't want to be going into social distancing and lockdown every year just for the influenza outbreaks. We've also had a very good with our training compliance in relation to Welsh Blood, where the figures for level 1 training for IPC is at 96. It's a little bit less within VCC of 81. However, they are working hard to get those numbers up, and that's to assure you in relation to that. We've also had 90% above average compliance to Start Smart, then Focus antimicrobials audit. We've appointed, and there has been some changes within the team as well, I should also add, and we've appointed a Band 4 surveillance and audit officer, which will enhance surveillance and audit capacity for IPC. We've refurbished some decontamination rooms within the operating theatres, and as I said, we have had some changes within the more senior team. Yazine has joined us and unfortunately is leaving us very shortly after, I think it's middle of next month, so I would like to wish him well too and thank him for his contribution to us as a trust over the last year. And then throughout 21-22, compliance with the required skin cleansing practices has remained high, and we are achieving very high in relation to that. The paper and report is there for you to approve, as the other reports are, Chair, and so I will pause there for any questions, and I'm sure Yazine would want to come in relation to any answers for that too, and I can see Nicola's got her hand up. I'll pause.
Okay, thanks. I had on my notes to self to thank Mohammed, as well as going off to Bradford, I believe. So on behalf of the board, before we get into questions, we want to thank Mohammed for his invaluable input to this trust and wish him every success in his new adventures and his new where his career takes him next. Nick, please.
Thank you, and thanks, Nigel. And you know, I cannot stress how fantastic our infection control outcomes from a patient acquisition perspective are compared with other organisations.
Absolutely.
We've actually seen an increase in prevalence of hospital-acquired infections. So I think that's down to the multi-professional efforts in the organisation and clearly the team as well. So just need to commend all our staff for that, because you know what this is about, isn't it, is patient and donor safety.
Yeah.
And preventing transmissions. Unfortunately, we have had outbreaks of COVID within our inpatient setting. Luckily, very quickly contained and managed very well. So, but you know, we're continuing to see periods of that, and we always take a risk-based approach and manage those through formal outbreak mechanisms, and we are undertaking the appropriate nosocomial investigations, and we'll be reporting the outcomes of those through to board in time, Chair. So I just wanted to stress about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I think if you put COVID to one side for a minute, I'd be shocked if there wasn't occasionally a COVID outbreak. And you're quite right to say that the containment, the measures that kick in immediately to contain things work very well and very smoothly. I think this is an astonishingly reassuring report for us to receive as a board, given the very vulnerable nature of the patients in the cancer centre in particular, but I'm not excluding Welsh Blood. I think this is an astonishingly positive report to receive, and I'll open it up for wider discussion. I know Martin wants to come in, but I can do nothing less than commend everybody, because it's not just the infection prevention and control team that are responsible for this. It's everybody in the organisation that's responsible for this. And I think I would want to note that in the minutes. Hope there's nothing negative now, but if there is, Martin, we'll take it on the chin.
No, I entirely want to echo Chair what you and Nicola said. It's a remarkable position to be in. And it's really reassuring that nobody's eyes been taken off the ball when COVID's coming, all the distraction on other things. So I think it's a terrific position. Just one little bit about, I think Stephen talked about statistics earlier on, and the same vein of statistics, the halving of numbers sounds great, but it's actually 6 to 3. And I suspect the year before, when it went from 3 to 6, I'm pretty sure we didn't see doubled. So just the careful use of language here. It's a really, really small number. And let's just say it's a really, really small number. We'd like to get the nil, but it's a really good position. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, one of the epitaphs that on my gravestone, there's going to be a list. But I think number 3 on the list is statistics is the science of large numbers. That's number 3 on the list that's gone on my gravestone. Thank you, Martin, for that. Stephen?
I just really wanted to follow on from Martin's observations. And I know several times we've reflected on the success of the vaccination programme last year. Obviously, this is a report about last year. I'm looking at section 4.4.1, and it's reminded me what a huge success the vaccination programme was. I know as a board previously, we've recognised that and thanked the staff, but it's reminded me that 233 individuals took part in that, and what an enormous achievement and what a fantastic success for all of those staff and for us as an organisation. So I think it's just another formal opportunity, Chair, just to reflect on that amongst a very successful year for this whole area of responsibility. So a big thank you off me, and I know a big thank you off the rest of the board, Chair.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Stephen, I endorse that. And Vicky?
Obviously endorse everything that everybody's been saying in terms of the positive report, but I would ask us just to look at 4.2.4 in terms of the environmental audits. And I think it highlights some of the lack of visible cleaning schedules. And I think as a board, as we start to go out and about more regularly, hopefully with less COVID waves, that we actually support the IPC team in actually how we tackle that, because I think the importance of walkabouts is seeing those schedules, seeing the levels of cleanliness, just to support ongoing improvement.
Do you want to respond to that, Nick?
No, absolutely agree. And we undertook a 15-step challenge this week, and this was one of the themes emerging from that. So yes, absolutely. And what we will do is to amend the 15-step challenge for former to ensure that that's included as part
we look
of
at it. I not detracting from what you've noted there, Vicky, which is important. The report we looked, the Putting Things Right report, some of the positive comments in there were about the cleanliness of the organisation, but it's about being seen to do what we're supposed to be doing as well, isn't it? Which is important. Oh, was Mohammed's hand up? It was up, but Lauren is telling me, but now it's, oh, there he is. Hello.
Yes.
Mohammed, hi.
Thanks, Chair, and just want to thank everyone, and especially Nicola and Nigel, and I've said this to them, I think more than once, that it'll be very hard to find bosses like this in other organizations. So I want to thank everyone who I worked with, my own team. They've been hardworking, and I made them work harder. I've been hardly working, and they've been working very hard. So the more credit goes to the team who worked with me. Once again, and thanks Nigel, and thanks Nicola for supporting me all the way since I've been here. And I also want to again say that life takes you wherever and you are going. But there were multiple factors that were part of the decision making to leave the trust. But I enjoyed thoroughly working here, learned a lot. Obviously, coming from other outside UK and try to learn the culture, the working culture, and everything. But it was a great learning experience as well. So thank you, everyone.
And as we can actually see you now, we couldn't see you earlier, but I'm sure hope you could hear me. We're wishing you all the very best, you know, where your career takes you, your next challenges. Thanks from everyone at Velindre, and the very best of wishes go with you.
And thank you for your kind words. Now you've made me cry. So,
and that's hard to do. No. So we're approving the Infection Prevention and Control Annual Report, and we come now to the last of the annual reports, and we will have a short comfort break after that, which is the Local Partnership Forum Annual Report. So can I just thank Nigel, Annie, and Tina, and latterly Mohammed for presenting these reports this morning. Thank you very much. And we come to Sarah now for the Local Partnership Forum report.
Okay, so this is the Local Partnership Forum Annual Report. It was endorsed by the Local Partnership Forum on the 5th of July, and also the Quality Safety Performance Committee on the 14th of July. I don't propose to go through it in huge amounts of detail, especially as it stands between us on our comfort break. However, I just wanted to point out one thing in particular around industrial relations and partnership working, which is detailed on page 5. And just pull to your attention really in the context of the broad and diverse range of topics which we've discussed at the LPF over the year. And you can see the range of them here. It's pretty much reflected in the conversations we have in committees and board. This is particularly, of course, about how we work in partnership with trade union colleagues. And we really recognise through the course of that year made a decision in June that we needed to look specifically at an opportunity to talk about partnership work in itself and how that works in our organisation. And what you can see is that a series of workshops were held in October last year, which were very well received and were well attended from trade union colleagues and from trust officers. And what that did was set the ground really for continuing to develop our relationships going forward. And we all know that true partnership working and effective partnership working only brings benefit really to how we move forward in our massive change agenda as an organisation. And that's why it is even more important now than ever. What we have had as a result of that, we have got an action plan, but fundamentally for me, some of the significant differences are the way that trade union colleagues from different trade unions are now starting to work together.
Oh, that's good.
Because we've never previously had an effective pre-meeting arrangement before LPF, if you like, or elsewhere in our arrangements to enable them to actually coalesce and discuss and then come to us and have a more informed discussion, if we want to put it like that. So, you know, we have got now colleagues who are pulling terms of reference together for a trade union group that will be developed, and there's already things happening where trade unions are working together to come and visit our sites and try and encourage people to become trade union representatives. Very importantly, we haven't got enough of them, and that's across the different trade unions. And we know that actually we need to grow the rep base in order that we can then grow the way that they can actually interact with our other governance arrangements. So I just wanted to point particular attention to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm looking around to see if there's any hands up while people are having a think. Sarah, I think I know the answer to this, but I made a note, but I'll ask it anyway. On page 5 of 6, there's a bullet point, trade union updates. and it talks about some of the concerns that the trade unions expressed. And I'm just wondering if the next bullet point and some of the others are in response to some of those concerns, what you've just said about workshops. Was that in response to the concerns listed in that bullet point?
The concerns particularly pointed us in a specific direction, and then from that evolved the broader aspects that we tackled in the workshops. So absolutely, we had some specific issues at the time which were particularly difficult in terms of industrial relations, and that was dealt with at the time. But then what that did was lead us into a different conversation about how we need to, actually surface the conversation. Then, how do we do things? Is everybody happy with the way that we carry out our partnership working arrangements? So that's what did then ultimately lead to the workshops.
So that for me is something, because that paragraph for me just leaves that issue hanging.
Okay.
I think what follows, I did say to myself, I think what follows is what addressed that, but I would welcome a sentence there which just say because you've addressed it or you are addressing it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you, Chair. That's
Thank you.
a good point.
I still can't see any hands up. So thanks, Sarah, for that and for all the hard work that you do work with our trade union colleagues, which is so important to the smooth running of our organisation. We approve that report, colleagues. Thank you. So that was a huge suite of reports for approval. I propose, unless anybody wants to stand against me, that we now have a 10-minute break. Okay, croeso nôl pawb. If you all had a nice, quick comfort break. We come to section 7 on the report, which is the quality and safety framework, which will be introduced by Nicola Williams, our Executive Director of Nursing, Allied Health Professions and Health Sciences, and we will be asked to approve this report. So Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So I'm really pleased today to finally, 2 years in the making, be able to bring you our proposed quality safety framework 22 to 24 for board approval. It was endorsed at Quality Safety and Performance Committee a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, it has taken much longer than anticipated to finalise, and that's been due to the effects of the pandemic. And we did develop this framework, by undertaking quite a lot of discussions and consultations with our staff throughout the process, even before we put pen to paper, and then whilst it was in draft format as well. Members will note the short tenure of the framework, and this is unusual for a document such as this, and that is deliberate, and it's deliberate because we're in a rapidly changing environment in respect of this agenda, and we have are anticipating the publication, hopefully before the end of 2022, but the time scales are somewhat delayed, of the statutory guidance for the duty of quality and for the statutory regulations for the duty of candour, and they will place some different requirements on us as an organisation. In addition, we're also engaging with work with Improvement Cymru and the Institute of Healthcare Improvement around what quality means for us and our safety infrastructure as an organisation. And last week, we had the foundation visits over 2 days by the IHI, and out of that will come a report, and we will need to further review and develop how we work and what we do as an organisation. So therefore we felt it was important that the framework is current, but we didn't want to delay it any longer. So so this framework that's before you is probably a little bit more detailed than I would normally, but I felt it was important to really spell out what it is that we are requiring. It talks about establishment in hubs, which really will be the engine rooms for our quality safety work and analysis, and the development, as I mentioned earlier, of a quality governance group really that will really will really pull together the analysis, the triangulation, and the synthesis of lots of information and data, and feed that in a more meaningful manner than we do currently through to our Quality, Safety and Performance Committee. The paper covers what the quality improvement goals for this year are, and they are goals that we are underway, and the majority of which are included in the IMTP, but also that going forward, we will really develop these goals well in advance of the publication of the IMTP, and make sure that they are helping to drive prioritisation in our IMTP going forward. And also attached is the implementation plan. So I'll pause there and take any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. We are, I endorse your comments, but we're very pleased to see it and understand perfectly that, you wanted to bring it at this point, and that you've signalled that there might need to be changes and modifications as more information becomes available to us. But we're very pleased to receive it today. So Vicky, I can see your hand went straight up.
Yeah, I think it's just to fully support the work that's behind this. But I think what's important for us as a board, QSP had brought together a number of different committees, and it certainly needs to focus on the support that this framework is going to offer in terms of those subgroups. And the distillation of those discussions, the outcome of those discussions, is what will need to come to QSP. So I think then the levels of assurance that we've looked at as a board in terms of our board development, those groups will be able to develop that and work with that, so that we're having a sort of higher level discussion and very clear about our priority areas as an outcome of all of those discussions. So I find it a really helpful framework and look forward to the outcomes.
Thank you, Vicky. We've been around this several times. Nick, this is not the first time you've talked about the framework to this board, and it's been to quality and so on. And Steve, if you wanted to come in.
I just Sam, I welcome this, and Nick and I talked about this, I think, almost since you started here, Nick, and that's not to comment on how long it's taken. I think this is a really important bit of the bedrock on which we build the organisation, and the implementation would be really key, and how we bed that not just in the committee and board structure, but throughout the organisation, which is where Nick and I tend to get to in our one-to-one discussions about that embedment and the foundations on which we work. So I'm really looking forward to working with this, and it fits in then as part of our frame of frameworks, for want of a better description, on which we actually work the organisation in all the coming years. And as Nick said, we will probably have to review it fairly quickly as we clear about the Quality Act. So yeah, I'm really pleased to see this come here today.
Yeah, I was just as an observation, I was involved in the interview for a new consultant radiologist just recently, and that I normally I come in at the end and I ask a question about duty of candour, because it quite often, it helps you discriminate between who's on top of that issue and who isn't. But they were talking about it. I was really quite pleased that the consultants on the interview panel were talking about duty of candour and how it applied in the particular setting that we were recruiting to. So I was pleasantly surprised with that. So the message is getting out there. Are there, Jazz?
Thank you, Chair, and it follows on nicely from what you've just said. I mean, I think this is much more than a framework. It is about the way we work. We've just been through a pandemic. Perhaps we've understood the importance of quality and safety in a way that we hadn't quite grappled with before. So I think there's a huge opportunity with this to really get our trust values in motion, to get a lot of the stuff that we want to do, to put quality at the center of everything that we do. So it's not an easy thing to deliver, and it will be, I mean, in a way, I welcome the iteration after 2 years, because we'll need to take a look at it and see where we are. But I think, the framework in a way is perhaps not the right title for it, because of what it tries to deliver. And I think it's, the improvement, the culture, and those are the bits that we really want to get on board with. So yeah, it's great.
Thanks, Jazz. That's really helpful. So Nick, going forward then, as and when you won't wait for 2 years to make changes, so they'll be reported through quality and if necessary up to the board.
Yeah, so the plan is, I think, 2023 will, next year we're going to have to start, redrafting this.
Yeah.
And so, depending on timescales for the outcome of the work we're doing as a trust, but also, the statutory guidance documents,
Yeah.
we will amend accordingly. And the other thing I omitted to say is what's important is that we evaluate and that, the plan is that we'll do this through a peer review. So we'll ask colleagues from elsewhere to come in and have a look and see, how are we doing this as well. Not a detailed review, but just as, because I think sometimes it's difficult when you're in it to be objective to, well, have we delivered what we said we're going to deliver? And we will undertake some sort of peer evaluation as well as evaluation by engaging with our teams prior to the redrafting of the updated strategy, but no later than early 2024 will it come back for approval.
Right. So that's very helpful, and we'll go into the cycle of business. Are there any other comments? And I'm not overly concerned that you're not getting more comments there, because we have been round this so many times, and now here it's come to us in its final form. And I want to ask the board if we are prepared to approve this quality framework, noting that in early 23 there'll be redrafting in response to the guidance that comes out and to other developments. Okay, so that's approved. Well done, Nick, and thank you to the whole team.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to the team, as well as yourself and your leadership. 7.20, delivering excellence performance report for the period ending May 2022. That's Kath. Kath, you're leading on this. I'm just looking for the paper.
Thank you.
Got it there. Got it.
So I'm just going to take you through a segment at a time and stop for questions as we go through the reports. And then when I've covered off both the Cancer Centre and Welsh Blood Service, I'm going to hand to Sarah to see if there's anything else that Sarah would like to add in terms of the workforce element. I'm going to come to the Cancer Centre report first. As you can see from the report, during the initial period of this financial year, we maintained pressure on both radiotherapy and SACT services. And that is due to a number of factors, and I'm going to take us through some of them, relating specifically back to the May performance, but also to give you an update on what we've got in terms of some of the development work that we've been undertaking. So you'll also recall from discussions we've previously had that we undertook over the last couple of years some work with the health boards to look at the planning and to look at the demand and when the demand was coming through. And one of the things that we're really experiencing at the moment is just that variation in demand. So we can see the number of patients in the system waiting to come to us. But what we are experiencing is considerable variation, both by tumour site, even on a weekly basis in terms of some of the referrals that we're having through. So what we've had to do to really explore why some of that is happening and to try and understand and project forward and plan in a little more granularity is to have increased number of operational meetings with the health boards to explore what they're doing and what their planning looks like, and to sort of try and understand what's going to be coming to us. So, for example, we know that some of the health boards are having waiting time initiatives. And then again, that can be in peaks and troughs, and it's putting variation into the patients that we're seeing. So working very hard to understand that and to use that to try and put some more granular, get some more granular understanding of what we can expect. What we're also seeing is some increase in disease presentation of patients coming through. And that is also then having a knock-on effect to some different ranges of some different treatment options that are and treatment choices that are being made. So just to provide you with assurance that we are working hard with the health boards to look at that and to understand that.
Nick, can I just ask you a question? I mean, to some extent, it's maybe because I don't understand the prediction and the planning models, but the health boards, in many ways, they can't control either which site-specific cancers get diagnosed in the health board. So it's not in any way that they're being contrary about
No,
it.
not at all.
You can't predict, you know, how many breast versus urology, but you know, are going to come forward.
I think there's an enormous number of competing factors here. And what we've got is the different levels of granularity as the data, which I know is one of your one of your favourite things. So we're looking at the projections that we would expect to see at an organisational level coming through. We also know the number of patients that are awaiting referral. But of course, in the way that we're experiencing staffing issues, and they're sporadic and they pop up in one area then another, then the health boards are experiencing that as well. So there are layers of factors that are all influencing this. There will always be the unknowns as well. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we've got a handle on the information that we can gather to just try and improve that transparency. I can see that Jazz wants to come in here as well.
Sorry, Jazz.
Yeah, I think just to add to the discussion, there are a number of different factors ongoing, but I think one of the things that the health boards tend to look at is managing the backlog, which might be radiology, might be diagnostics in terms of pathology, and then surgical intervention. And in order to do that, there are some schemes that are ongoing, such as waiting list initiatives for surgery, some regional working that's happening, Cardiff and Cwmtaf working together. There are endoscopy lists, because that's a big, you know, so that what we're looking at as a system is where are the bottlenecks? How do we address them? I think that, so all these things have consequences on the work that falls to oncology.
Yeah.
Which is often not necessarily part of that health board lens. And that's our challenge, because some of these decisions get made overnight. There's a slot available in a private hospital and there's another endoscopy list set up.
Yeah.
So how do we get in on that? How do we respond to that? And these are the conversations we're now starting to try and be much more part of, ongoing.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful explanation, Jazz. Thank you.
Steve wants to.
Steve.
Just add one part to that. We have to plan our service, don't we?
Yeah.
So we have to have some assumptions based on sound evidence of what we think might happen.
Yeah.
Those conversations help us to flex.
Yeah.
And make sure we're in a far more managed place than just receiving the next batch of referrals. And that's why. So it's refining that, but having a core plan, and we'll no doubt come to that at some time in the discussion, it actually does take us forward, that we can actually plan which bits we're going to do when, which bits of initiative we're going to put in place. So that's what we're working with. And these conversations will help. So if they do set up an initiative one Saturday, we cited on it, and the fact that it may well be an impact on us in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time. So that's the level of conversation we're getting into.
So I think following on from Steve's comment, within our plans for this year, our plan was that we would see an overall growth of 12% for SACT and 8% for radiotherapy. Clearly, there's going to be variations and patterns in that growth through the year, as we normally see peaks and troughs throughout the year as well. So as Steve said, it's actually planning at that system level. What is the overall increase in our capacity that we're planning for? And then how do we get the more granular planning to plan on a month-by-month basis and even on a week-by-week basis? So, various levels at which we're actually planning and monitoring, and we're just trying to improve that all the time. So going back to May now, in particular for radiotherapy, in May, we saw demand for radiotherapy services that exceeded those projections in terms of that planning. And also was actually one of the highest demands that we've ever seen. We're continuing in the context of that to see increases in the complexity of the planning, as we've previously discussed, and sustained challenge of the aging fleet that we're working with. We are seeing that variation between different tumour sites. And as we've previously discussed with the board, the configuration of the fleet creates some challenges in flexing between that. However, there is a piece of work that's ongoing with the breast in relation to breast treatment to look at how we can maybe create additional capacity by flexing some of the configuration of the machines, and that work is underway. What we're also seeing again is increasing demand for brachytherapy, and we're working with WISC and starting to look at the implementation of increased capacity as we go through the year on that now. Shall I pause there for a sec to see if anybody's got any further questions on that?
I've got a couple. I think I'll just, while I'm waiting for people's hands to go up, the cover sheet doesn't quite convey how poorly SACT is performing now for non-emergency SACT. I think the cover sheet, when you look at the report further down, performance for non-emergency SACT is really dipped, and I don't think the cover sheet signals that to us. So I know you're having weekly meetings, yeah. So just to plan how you overcome that issue.
Well, yeah. Shall I provide you with some more of the detail around
Yeah,
the
okay.
SACT? I swear I'd covered off some of the radiotherapy, so I just maybe was just going to see if anybody.
Oh, you were just going to, I thought you were doing BCC.
Oh, no, sorry,
Okay.
just to see if anybody's got any questions on radiotherapy, and I can come on to SACT if that's okay, Chair.
Sorry, Kath, I do apologise.
Okay.
I'll come back to that then later. The only other one query I have, and I've raised this in one or two other meetings, is when do you expect the brachytherapy business case to be approved? Because there's a suggestion it should already be approved, and then somewhere else, I'm not quite sure if it's still in progress. So so we need to know the answer. I have some rough idea of that. I'm still waiting that we can see the external peer review report that was done on the brachytherapy service. So we're hoping that we can, because it says at one point that the brachytherapy business case is still going through internal processes, and elsewhere it suggests that it's been submitted, and I'm not quite sure where we're up to.
And to be quite honest, Chair, I've just been off for a couple of weeks, and I'm not too sure where that business case.
Nick knows. Nick knows.
Thank you. Yes, so the business case has been approved, and
Brilliant.
appointment into posts is underway. And in relation to your comment on the peer review, we had a meeting with Clatterbridge yesterday. We received the draft report. There are a couple of sort of professional nuances that just need tweaking on the report, and we've got a brachytherapy improvement board tomorrow where we'll be looking at the next steps. Thanks. I was going to give you that assurance, Chair, that we weren't waiting for the agreement of the business case to start looking at the implementation. That was already in train, because the discussions we'd had with WISC led us to, we're on that basis we knew it was going to be approved. That was
So that's great. Thank you both for that reassurance. Gareth and then Vicky, please. Gareth first. Oh, then Martin. Martin, did you have your hand up? Yeah, you did. So I'll take Gareth, Martin, then Vicky. Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. And forgive me if I'm asking this in the wrong place. I'm not quite sure where we are now. But in relation to the VCC performance report, there's a statement against the outpatients row that data collection was paused in December 2021. Have we recommenced data collection now, and where are we on that, please?
We haven't recommenced data collection. It's a manual task where a member of staff tracks patients through the department, takes a snapshot of the number of clinics on a day. And due to the overwhelming pressure in outpatients in terms of sustaining that data hasn't been collected because it's just a manual, that manual exercise. But what we are looking at doing is to try and find other measures that we can use to actually determine the quality of patient experience in the outpatients department, and we're working to look at what information we can bring forward to help with that, and that will be included in the new PMF when that comes forward in the next month or so.
Okay, because we've been waiting for the outpatient data to help inform us about the development of that service for a long time, Stephen, haven't we? Thanks for that answer. Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just two things, just to read between the lines. I think this is what you said, Kath, just to check. Under, I guess it's all of Velindre Cancer Centre, I suspect you mentioned increased pressure. there's two things in there. One is a more of a flow through from the health boards to us. And the other thing you say in the waiting times, you say a greater burden of disease, and so presenting at a later stage, so there's more complex or different cases. You're saying it's anecdotal at the moment, but I'm guessing that it's a long-term position. We're going to see more people, and they're going to be more complex or with greater diseases. What's the answer? Because without dealing with something rather significant, that's a huge issue.
I think there was a time before the data was really going to start being available, but I know some audits have been undertaken, and I'm going to I'm looking down the table to Jazz, because I know she can fill us in on some work that she was party to looking at presentation.
Yeah, I think that this is a question that's being answered, that there isn't a lot of data at the moment out there to help us with it. What we do know from a small audit that we've done internally looking at breast cancer, that we compared a time period in 2019 with a time period in 2021. And we demonstrated that there was a sort of 5 to 6% increase in stage 4 presentations. So for the same time period, a sort of 5 to 6% increase in patients presenting with metastatic disease. And I think what we were trying to do was to, have a baseline, which we're now going to re-audit in more detail. But I guess it's all the consequences of what that means. We were aware that there were patients being discussed in the MDTs, which we couldn't offer treatment. So they were so far advanced that we were not able to intervene. They were going straight to palliative care. And that troubled us, and this is what prompted the audit. I have to say that it does feel, it feels as if that particular issue has settled down to some extent. So, all the initiatives, I guess, that are ongoing at the moment are about catching, making the diagnosis as early as possible. And I think with all the rapid diagnostic centers and initiatives going on, we may well see a real shift that actually we start to have earlier presentations. That will have possibly more of an impact on us as oncologists, because more patients to treat in a radical form, which again, is resource intensive. So I think this is why we need to have our kind of business intelligence so live and dynamic that we can pick up these changes, and we just need to know what our data is. Steve was saying earlier, in the absence of that, we've got to plan and make assumptions on what we think is happening. But I suppose it's to give you some assurance that all these questions we're trying to look at them in our best possible way to guide us really, and to make sure we have the right provision of care.
Can I just check that perhaps this is the math, I guess. Are we now linking activity volumes to finances nowadays or not?
We've always done that in the sense of, obviously our income for the trust is heavily dependent on the activity that flows through the organization. So in that sense, yes, and we have always done that. And obviously we've got the new contracting model, which is a lot more sophisticated. So, it counts 60 different types of activity, whereas the traditional contract was 7, an inpatient, a day case, an outpatient. Now we've got 60 different activities, mainly categorized between planning for both radiotherapy and preparation for SACT, and then treatment. So treatment times vary. So all of that is quite sophisticated. In terms of the forward look, again, in terms of income, I'm forecasting using all the demand modeling that's going on with our health board colleagues to try and predict what that means for the organization in terms of income as well. So it's important for both the finances and the service side to be joined up in that way.
So just to finish, just to finish on that. So increased volumes means potentially increased income, and therefore we can fund to provide a bigger service to make sure we treat the patients that come through to us.
It does, but there's obviously sophistication in that. As I said, there's 60 different ways of monitoring the activity, and some of the changes in pathways that have happened during COVID, and some of the new treatment techniques is an ongoing discussion with our commissioners about changing that model. So it's not like locked in and permanent forever, as I'm sure you imagine. So,
Steve, do you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, just to add on the conversation already, in terms of the importance of linking these things together and understanding and teasing out what our underlying growth is versus the catch-up element is really important about how we use the money. and how do we invest in the right areas for our future? And I think that's what we're working really hard to understand. We've got some underlying assumptions we've had for years about what the numbers would look like, and then you can assume and respond in different ways, and we can take our staff with us on through that conversation as well, because you can say about we might need to do something for 6 months, all things being equal, but after that we will get back to a more normalized investment level and trail of money through the organization. So we're linking all these things up through this year as we develop that and move out of the COVID financial management arena that we're in into the new one.
Just to add to that before I move on to SACT, there's a piece of work I've initiated with Matt and the team to look at to sort of link through our review of the financial position in Q1 when we go around each of the teams to actually start to look at that, mapping that to the activity and to the projections in terms of looking at what our anticipating our growth is going to be, and really looking at that, looking at our current financial position through the lens of the new contracting framework. So it's all adding more intelligence to it.
Vicky, did you have your hand up? I thought you did, yes. Vicky next.
I think it's just to ask on the radiotherapy, because obviously doing the walk around with Nick the other day within radiotherapy was fascinating. But I think obviously concerns that are represented on our risk register about the LINAC, the age profile, and obviously replacement. And one of the rooms, LINAC 6, it has been out of action for a considerable amount of time, and there was no indication that it was going to be back online. So is there any capital considerations at the present in terms of creating our, obviously maximising our capacity?
So LINAC 6 hasn't been used for some considerable time, but it is still utilisable if we needed it to. That's the start of the plan for the change out of the LINACs under the IRFs. So any capital investment at the moment in radiotherapy for the LINACs will be through that programme. So the simple answer is no, but we are still flexing, and that machine is still utilisable should we require it. And at the moment, we're currently scoping the plan for what that change out and implementation of the new LINACs is going to be. So there's a lot of work that's ongoing at the moment to try and figure out what the best options for that is.
So could I actually ask what would trigger the use of that room then, in terms of actually using it?
Demand, sufficient demand and staff in a ratio that will enable us it to be better to use that one in addition, or potentially breakdown of another machine.
Okay, I guess that needs to be further understood. If we're going to maximise our capacity, we need to understand what triggers it and why we wouldn't be using that now, in terms of being ahead of that, balanced against the risks of using that machine. So understand there's a reason why it isn't being used, but if actually at some point you would use it to increase your capacity, that needs to be understood by the board.
Yeah, it wouldn't be our first choice, but I'll provide you with an update on exactly the rationale for it and exactly what the plan is.
Well, if we could have an update through QSP, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, because we haven't started on radiotherapy. I started. No, we haven't started on SACT.
No, we haven't started on SACT,
okay.
I've understand.
So Andrew.
Thanks. A couple of points on the VCC performance report. One is a presentational that some of the tables, and I'm looking on page 6, which is the tumour sites. The first two columns both say 2020 to 2021, and the one on the left should of course say 2019, 2020. It causes a bit of confusion.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? When you look at the average relative to 2021 average, it confuses me at first. And that crops up in some of the later tables as well.
Thank you.
Just to, yeah, it's small detail,
No,
but
it's
it helps to
essential,
understand.
isn't it?
Yeah. There was more general, again, it might not be in the right place, but I was wondering about the demise of the Rutherford. And there's not a lot in the papers about where things have got to there in terms of, because again, obviously that presents a significant challenge, potential opportunity. I know there were discussions going on. It might be helpful just to have an update on that, because there wasn't a lot in the papers, at least that I saw.
No. So there are ongoing discussions with the landlords of the site in Newport to try and understand exactly what utilisation we might have and what the options are. I know Hugh Llewellyn in Carl's team has been leading that piece of work for us
Yeah, so yes, they are. Is it worth picking that up in part B, perhaps?
Yeah,
There's some
yeah,
commercial aspects
thank
to that as well, but happy to
Thank
give you
you.
a full update to where we got to in part B.
So we got two columns, that table you were referring to, we got two columns where the monthly averages for 2020-21.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that was,
look, it's gone, we've gone.
Yeah.
Oh, they're back.
Yeah, internet just dropped out for a second.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to panic.
That was the point I was making about the columns.
Oh, that was the point that okay, so I missed.
Yeah.
Right. So can Kath move on to SAC
Yes,
now?
I will. SAC now. Sorry, one final comment to make, and that is that treatment planning. We've mentioned that treatment planning is quite a challenge. So we actually have a task and finish group on treatment planning, a task force on that at the moment that is looking at how we can make incremental small changes to give us an overall better flow and also increase capacity for treatment planning. So SAT, we're continuing to see in the month of May, we had some considerable staff absences, you can see from the cover paper, which put the service under considerable pressure. And we were again supported from across other parts of the cancer centre with staff. I think we need to recognise that it's not only those number of chairs that we have or the number of staff that we have, but there are a number of elements that also add to the overall delivery of the SAT service. And that includes the pharmacy requirement as well. So again, as with radiotherapy, we've got a complete focused task force that is set up looking at all the changes that we need to make to increase our SAT provision. Some of those are immediate changes, some of them are medium and longer term, and that is being reviewed on a weekly basis by the senior leadership team and also by us as the executive team. So some of that work includes looking at the pharmacy work patterns. There's a consultation process underway, an OCP, that will enable us to change the working patterns in pharmacy to increase availability of staff and hence our capacity. We're looking at active recruitment is underway. That's now happening on a rolling basis, so we can make sure that we're able to sustain that ongoing recruitment activity. And recognising the fact that the training of these staff on recruitment also takes a number of months for them to be able to operate fully as part of the team. We're also making consideration of the space. We have, as we've mentioned before, returned to Prince Charles Hospital. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we maximise the utilisation of our staff across both sites so that we can maximise our activity. But there is a plan to increase that activity in Prince Charles now over the next couple of months. And we're still having ongoing discussions with Anira and Bevan about our return to Neville Hall. There were some proposals that have been made that we're just having ongoing discussion with them. So again, to note that we are considerably under pressure in the service and our performance is reflecting that. But there is a considerable number of actions underway to make sure that we're able to address that. We anticipate that with all the plans that are in place, where, for example, we're implementing Saturday clinics now from August, and we've had a really good response from our staff in terms of working additional time over the summer period. We're anticipating that really it's going to be September or October before we start to see us making any headway in terms of some of the backlog that we've got. But that's what the plans are indicating at the moment.
Thanks, Kath. It's enormous pressure on the service. I get that. It has seemed to have taken an extraordinary period of time to get Prince Charles back up and running. It was very quick to sort of say, right, we can't look after patients here in Prince Charles now due to COVID, repatriate them all to Velindre, but it's been very, very slow going back the other way. So is that fully commissioned now, but fully back in operation in Prince Charles?
It's not fully back in operation. There's the potential to do that, but the decisions that we've had to make in the last number of months is that we could get more efficiency out of our staff by them operating on the Velindre site than we could if they went to Prince Charles. So we had some difficult decisions to make around what the staffing ratio was and the number of beds that we had open there. But the plan is now in place with the recruitment of additional staff to enable us to return to Prince Charles and for that to be an efficient model, as efficient as as we can.
You can, and to restart in Neville Hall.
Yes, so there'll be a restart in Neville Hall. The details of that is yet to be determined because of some of the constraints at the Neville Hall site. They were offering us a space that had 4 chairs, but clearly that's not a terribly efficient model and wouldn't have given us what we require. But there are further discussions that took place last week, and they're going to be bringing forward further options to us over the next couple of weeks.
So when can we expect the figure that leaps off out of the graphs is non-emergency sacked patients, who should be treated within 21 days, and there were 23 people who waited longer than 42 days, as it says here, which is if you're the patient, that's a long time to wait to start your treatment. So when do you think we might, given all that you've told us, when might we see those figures coming back to what we'd be more comfortable with?
Well, I'm hoping that we're going to, sorry, Steve's.
Well, I'll catch Gareth now, but yeah, okay. Can you answer my question first and then I'll go to other people?
Kath, do you want to start?
Yeah, okay, so we will see increased capacity through August. And so we'll hope that we'll start to make some headway into the backlog out then, but it is going to be through September and October before we start to really see a sustained and increased performance return to where we'd expect it to be.
So finally, before I leave this point then, so if I'm a patient and I have to wait more than 42 days, how is that handled and communicated and so on? What support do we offer patients who have to wait that long?
So again, we were implementing the recognised professional guidance on the patient prioritisation, and there's a communication channels between the booking team and the site-specific team clinicians, so that they're able to give the patients an understanding of exactly when they will be expected to be treated, and that's updated on a regular basis. I don't know if there's anything else that Jazz wanted to add in relation to that.
I think just to acknowledge that these are really challenging times.
Yeah.
And we aren't always getting it right.
Yeah.
And I think, but we recognize the sort of areas which are vulnerable and the need to therefore, in our weekly meetings, address these, discuss them. We're trying to do a little clinical audit to look at, is the priority working? Are the people that are, are we using the tools that we have effectively enough? And if we aren't, and as you said, I absolutely agree with you about people who may be waiting, we need to communicate because it's a very worrying time.
Yeah.
Particularly if these are first definitive treatments. But
yeah.
So I suppose we haven't been in this place before and therefore don't necessarily have everything in place. However, we are working very hard to recognize those vulnerable areas, our patients, how we communicate, ensuring that we're also looking at the clinical harm, if any, that may be being created as a consequence of this. There have been a couple of datexes put in. We've investigated those. In fact, the initial analysis is that possibly the harm isn't as a consequence of the SACT, but other bits of the process, other bits of the system, because people are also waiting for investigations once the decision to treat is made, and it may not always be the chair time that is the failing
the cause of the delay. Yeah.
So, but recognize the challenge that is there.
Okay, thanks, Jazz and Kath. Gareth, you had your hand up, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question was more specific around timing as well. And I appreciate that these issues are not entirely within our control, but when can we expect to be back online at Prince Charles and Neville Hall? Because by the sounds of it, that capacity would help address some of the issues.
So did you say September, October?
So by September, October for Prince Charles, but for Neville Hall, we still don't have a plan for Neville Hall, though we are still working on that. The plan for Neville Hall is tied up with the reconfiguration of the site at Neville Hall that's been undertaken by Anira and Bevan, and the fact that the capacity that they were offering us wasn't adequate for you know what it would actually take in terms of staffing that number of chairs, and it was better for us to go to Prince Charles and fully expand at Prince Charles and look at further expanding at Prince Charles to make sure that we maximise the patient staffing ratio to make the best use of our staff resource. So we're trying to balance off location, staff, chairs, you know, all of those. So I think Steve wants to.
Steve?
Yeah, I don't just reflect on what Jazz was saying. Just to build on, we are responding also to losing the fact we plan to have our other foot in place during this time. So we've had to bring everything forward. We did be developing that plan, and we did give a bit of an update to QSP at the last meeting. First of all, we need to stabilise the position, and then we're going to make it better. And we have a plan in place for both. That's been enacted, and it starts this weekend. Actually, not waiting to the beginning of August to actually have the first weekend clinics in place. So that's been a real challenge over the last 4 or 5 weeks, losing that capacity that we would have brought on, and we'd already started to use for RT as well. So we've moved everything around over that 4 weeks, bringing it forward, and we will stabilise. We will start to improve, subject to the conversation we had about the demand that we're forecasting we will get being the demand we actually get. So those conversations with health boards are really important, that we get cited on any initiatives they're having over the summer as well. So we have responded. It's not our original plan, but we now have another plan which does put capacity in place to deal with it.
Absolutely.
And we are looking at everything, including Linux 6, which as we develop the IRS implementation, we're going to have to be really clear, particularly in the context of losing our effort at the moment.
So is that finished with facts, Kath?
Yes, so there wasn't anything else specifically other than to highlight the maintenance of the therapies team.
I was going to say the therapies team are doing very well, aren't they?
They are a small team who are also under pressure, and are maintaining that. I'm happy to take any other questions on VCC. Sorry, Nick.
So just because we're talking about the therapies team, I just think it's important to let the board know that we've appointed a substantive new head of therapies for the cancer service, who is Kate Baker, who has been in an interim position for quite some time, but you know, Kate is now substantively heading up that team and doing a grand job.
Excellent.
Can I just add to that Kate's level of curiosity, learning, wishing to develop, even I'm having trouble trying to keep up with her her thirst for where we're going and how we're gonna do it. It's a really great appointment.
I think it's important that we do note the performance of the therapies team, because that in the past we've had some concerns about waiting for therapies. They're doing very well. So just as we've acknowledged the waiting for SACT and radiotherapy, I think it's important we acknowledge in our minutes the therapy team's compliance with waiting time targets. If there aren't any other queries on, and perhaps you pass that message on, Nick, to the team. Can we go then to WBS, Kath?
Yep. So
I found this one quite hard. The print is very small,
isn't it?
and then if you enlarge it, you've got to be moving back and forth across the screen. I don't know if that's just being pernickety, but I found this quite hard to read.
It's impossible to read, and I have asked, can it be made larger, or we just need to put less in there? It just needs to be in the cover paper. So I'm absolutely there with you on that one, Chair. So I'm going to touch upon some of the measures other than stock management at WBS and the current stock levels, and I'm going to come to talk about that at the end. So first of all, I wanted to focus on the Welsh Bone Marrow Donor Registry, which is on page 3 of the PMF document itself. You will notice that we are still under target for our recruitment of bone marrow volunteers. This can be quite cyclical through the year, because historically we've recruited a lot in the universities and schools when we go there in through the autumn. We have initiated the start of the action plan to use swabs and to attract potential non-blood donor volunteers to the register. There are plans in place to do that, and we've got some help from an agency to really look at a big campaign through the autumn. So our expectation is that those numbers will increase considerably through the autumn as we start to initiate that campaign. And just while we're talking about the Welsh Bone Marrow Donor Registry, clearly the number of stem cell transplants that we donations that we will be able to undertake is directly related to the size and shape and demographic of our registry. So I'm just going to take you out of the order of the way in which these run on the pages to take you down to the second graph on page 4, which is stem cell collections. So you see here again, our number of stem cell collections that we undertake is below the projections that we've got for this year on two counts really. We're still seeing the aftermath of COVID in terms of the impact of that on the overall number of stem cell collections that are being undertaken globally. But we are also starting to see a small reduction in our market share, effectively, the number of the total that we're undertaking. And what we're also seeing is an increase in the number of cancellations that we get. So a stem cell centre will ask a number of centres to work up a number of donors, and then they will choose whichever donor they're going to select, and then that donor carries on that pathway. But what we are seeing is an increase in the number of donors that are being worked at, ready to make a donation, being cancelled, and some work's going on to actually try and understand whether or not that's just patient well-being and what the factors are that are influencing that. And we're having discussions with our partners globally to sort of try and understand that. So I'll provide you with an update on that when we know some more. So I just wanted to take those two items together because they both related to the registry. The other item that I wanted to draw to your attention was the productivity in the blood collections. And if you can bear with me a second, I didn't know what page that was on. That is on page 6. It's the third graph down on page 6, the whole blood collection productivity. Yeah. We know that some of the increased interventions that we've had, the IPC interventions from COVID, have reduced the efficiency of our ways of working as additional costs have been introduced. That obviously is now starting to change, and we're starting to see that productivity coming back. That's been aided with the reduction in social distancing, and we're continuing to look at how we can make those bring our productivity back to the levels that we would have anticipated pre-pandemic. Those are the only items that I wanted to highlight from that report, other than to talk to you about the stock levels. So all of the blood services in the UK are under considerable pressure in terms of the blood stocks due to a number of factors. The first of these being staff availability, staff absence. Second being donors not attending. Third being just some of the venue sizes, staffing ratios. So we're all really finding that we're under pressure. We are doing remarkably well in WBS to make all of the small incremental changes that we can to make sure that we make absolute best use of the capacity that we've got, and that we're also able to target that on the different group mixes that we need. So having those daily resilience meetings, looking at our stock levels, and looking at exactly the balance between the different groups. So one of the things that we've been having to do is to stand down some donors of some blood types, and particularly for making sure that we use the capacity we've got for O negative collection. We have been maintaining our memorandum of understanding and some sort of resilience support from the other UK services. However, that is becoming harder. One of the other things that we're doing is we're looking at very much more local targeted social media advertising. Anybody that's on social media might notice that there's some quite geographically pointed calls for donors in certain areas. Again, what we don't want to do is do a massive call to arms for donors, because we're doing by appointment, and we also need to look at that balance of blood groups. So again, a very complex situation. But just to advise you that our stock levels are very tight. We're working with the senior leadership team and Alan, who have got some very detailed plans in terms of how we're managing that, both in the immediate term and looking at our stock build through and on into the winter. But it is becoming very difficult right across the UK. All of the other services are in the same position, and the situation remains precarious. So clearly we're working with the other UK services as well to look at how we address this across the UK.
So thank you, Kath. Looking around. So has the move to appointments only and no walk-ins, has that sort of backfired on us a little bit?
No, I don't think that is one of the factors. I think it's easier for us to control the group mix. So in a way, it's been a really good tool for us because we actually know what's in the plan, what's in that forward book. Although we are looking now at whether or not we will take some walk-ins, and there's a challenge around how we get the balance right of the number of donors we're expecting to turn up. So again, it's highly complex, and we're working through all the options at the moment.
So I don't know how many walk-ins would be new donors or how many walk-ins are repeat donors, but you don't know what you're missing if they can't come in.
Yeah, so we've started some activity this week to look at using the What's My Type campaign to go out and target new donors, but to book them in. So it's actually going out, I think it's Tesco's at Talbot Green, going there with the What's My Type, where you just have a quick blood spot and you know your blood type, and then actually talking to people about and getting them to become a donor. So we're out on that new donor recruitment campaign as well to make sure that we're looking at increasing our number of new donors. But it's very much better for us to be able to go and do the What's My Type and then get them to make an appointment, because again, it allows us to plan exactly what we know we're going to be bleeding.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on WBS? Andrew?
Only a quick suggestion on bone marrow volunteers. You said that, of course, at the moment it's the end of the academic year and students presumably would be potentially good to recruit. I mean, there are thousands of them. I don't know whether you already have links to student union officers. You already do that, and particularly the ones in the medical sciences and healthcare sciences. You know, so many of our students are looking for opportunities to do, if you like, good citizenship and be good citizens, particularly in those areas. So, and of course, we are by September coming to a new academic year with thousands of new students. So I don't know whether there's anything more you can do, but it sounds like you're onto that.
So we've always done that, and it's always been part of our annual cycle is to make sure we hit all the freshers fairs and we've got good staff presence there. However, what we've experienced in the last couple of years, of course, is that these big events aren't happening and everybody's been learning at home. So for the last couple of years, we've had a real attrition in terms of the number of new donors coming onto the registry. So we're playing catch up on that. We're playing catch up on that now. But plans will be in place for us to be at all the fresher events, and also to not only rely on that, but also to try and follow through with schools, sixth forms, and to look at other innovative ways of reaching out into the population.
Thanks. So, Kath, to what extent is no hands up? Is blood supply a risk to this organisation? Now, you have noted, you said it's getting harder through mutual aid to get the other blood services to keep providing us. So how big a risk is this issue to us, or are you mitigating actions minimising that risk?
Our mitigating actions in minimising it. The mutual aid isn't just us receiving, it's us giving as,
no, I know,
as well.
But at the moment,
so
we are low.
Well, we're low, but everybody's low. We're actually doing okay. So our levels are slightly more resilient maybe than some of the other services as of this week. We are building back slowly. We've seen increases in our stock levels over the last couple of weeks, but it does remain precarious.
Jazz.
Just to add to this discussion, the one element that we're also working on and we play a leadership role is in the usage of blood. So whilst we're addressing this issue around the stocks, we also need to look at how we are utilizing it. And there is a big piece of work which the blood service lead in collaboration with the BHNOG, which is the National Oversight Group for Blood, and working in tandem with Welsh Government to influence health boards on how They actually promote the use of blood, safe use of blood. We're doing audits internally. And I've taken papers to the medical directors to try and champion this. So it's just to say that there's another responsibility in a sense that we have in this on this issue, which is really important and timely.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jazz. Matt?
And just on Jazz's point, just to say one of the bids to the Value-Based Healthcare Fund that Welsh Government hold was in relation to good use of blood, working with our health board partners over the next 3 years. And I can say that we have been successful in receiving funding for that. So that's really positive step for Welsh Blood Service, the trust, in taking forward that work that Jazz is describing in a more structured way with the resources it needs. So I think that is something that we could all be proud of, hopefully, when it all gets up and running.
Thanks for that, Matt. Bit of good news. Stephen?
Just a question on, sorry, I had just a question on the report.
Yeah.
So on page 7, when we look at donor satisfaction, so I'll use this perhaps as an example of a more general question, where we've achieved 96% donor satisfaction, which is obviously excellent. And we're way above target, because the target's only 71%. So one way to be way above target is to set a very low target. So this, I'm going to do my reverse logic again. So we're on the face of it saying the target means that 29% unsatisfied or dissatisfied would still see us achieving the target. So the more general question is how, just as a reminder for me, how these targets are actually set and how often they're reviewed. So, you know, I don't know where the 71% target came from, but it does sound a little low to me.
The majority of our targets are set through the European Blood Alliance, and they are reviewed through the European Blood Alliance Working Group. However, we're also reviewing all of our targets as part of the new PMF work, and that is one of the ones that we were looking at, as Carl's signalling.
Yeah, and we've had the discussion, obviously, from an experiential perspective, and you know that they have definitely for the new PMF increased that target. I can't recall specifically what it is. It's 90 something, but I don't want to tell the board it's 90 or 95. It's one of those two, but I mean it really should be 95% is what we should be aiming for, if not 100, obviously.
Just add one point to that. Yeah, just by not by chance, it's by design. It's chance sounds a bit lucky. We've had this conversation prior to this meeting this morning in terms of the next stages of the PMF, as Kath said. So we've got the new PMF will hopefully come to the board, subject to the pilot being successful in October, November. As your point rightly stated, Stephen, we've then got a whole looking at the targets, either just the national standards or the from tos, how they align to our plan. So from 10 to 100 over 3 years, so understanding that. Then we get a bit about automation, so automation analytics and insight. And then the last bit, you'll see in the papers, there's also a range of other measures we want to measure, which we don't have a data capture in place for. So those will be development phases. So there's the next task really is to go back around the target to make sure they fit for purpose. As you described, there's some things which are probably unachievable and unrealistic, and there's some things which probably we need to perhaps raise the bar a bit given the levels of performance so far. So we'll bring that forward at the strategy committee in the coming months.
So just finally, I think I'd like to pay testament to our collaborative working with the health boards, because stocks are really tight. They've decreased the stocks that they are holding to enable us to be more flexible with it. And again, to pay testament to their relationship and the collaborative relationship we've built with them over a period of time. Because without that mutual relationship at the moment, we wouldn't be able to be managing as we are.
Thank you. Thanks, Kath. So we've discussed, reviewed and noted the performance report for the Cancer Centre and Welsh Blood. Are we now handing over to Sarah for workforce? Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So as we've discussed, we've got the May report in front of us in our papers, but I'd just like to bring our information a little bit more up to date, because as we've just heard through the performance reports for the two divisions, you know, the workforce and the workforce availability is completely key to how we're starting to get on top of some of the challenges. So the sickness absence levels in the year to the 24th of July was 6.54%. So we're still there or thereabouts the same levels that we've been seeing, and we know that that reflects a trend that takes us up and down in terms of COVID absence. So just to give you some idea of the numbers, so COVID sickness in the week on Sunday, the 24th of July, which of course was last Sunday, were 19 staff across the organisation. 19. And the week before that, it was 28. So we are seeing some slight decreases in COVID absence. Those numbers in themselves seem relatively low, but of course they sometimes happen, as Kath said, in specific pockets, which then causes us an issue.
Yeah.
However, what we also need to recognise that what we've heard from Kath over the last number of minutes is a very delicate balancing act between using our staff and utilising our staff resource in a different way to meet service pressures and impacts on well-being and impacts on staff availability to take leave and all the things we know and we've discussed previously in these meetings. So it's striking that very delicate balance, isn't it, between ensuring that we are delivering the service we need to whilst also maintaining staff well-being. And we know that some people are struggling with that. Very, very importantly, of course, we've got a large programme of well-being activity as an organisation, which we've talked about previously. We've got this new staff psychologist coming on board now and has been appointed and will start with us shortly. And that is an additional resource that we're going to utilise very, very importantly. Been talking to Rachel about piloting some additional wellbeing activities in the cancer centre, which we can then evaluate and look at rolling out again across the organisation. And another very important element to that is financial wellbeing, because if we think of the whole well-being in the round, of course, we all know we can't get away from the significant pressures on people at the moment around finances and resources for themselves individually and their families.
Yeah.
So we have got a financial well-being element and offering, which we are continually communicating and reinforcing through senior leadership teams and so on. So we can support staff if they need to get advice, support in that element as well, which of course is very, very important. We're still seeing 30% of our absence as a result of stress, anxiety and depression. So, whilst we talk about COVID, actually many more staff are off as a result of other elements of illness. But of course, we know that all these things are linked together.
Yeah.
Because the tail of 2.5 years of pandemic plus financial well-being as an element does lead us to have staff being absent for those stress, anxiety, depression reasons. So there's an awful lot in the mix there.
There's a lot in the mix, Sarah. One of the things Steve and I've discussed, because I've raised with him, so we've had the pandemic and they rose to the challenge. We've had the vaccination programme when we heard earlier today how well the staff, 250 odd staff rose to that challenge. And now we're going into Saturday working. And I just want some assurance that, we're not exacerbating the stress and anxiety problem through the pressures that we're putting on staff. Appreciating absolutely that, we've got to do this because we've got patients at the bottom of the, we've got patients, but in so much as you are able, Sarah.
Do you want to come in first, Steve?
Yeah, just there's no one approach to that, is there? So the
No.
conversation we're having is how do we communicate with staff what we're asking, the context for what we're asking them to do, so that Saturday working.
Yeah.
How long are we planning on that for? So it's not a permanent feature at the moment. I'll ask it because it's volunteer based. And again, ready to
Volunteer based, and it will be.
yeah, so they need to know we've got something longer term that we plan to do.
Yeah.
So bringing forward the Prince Charles. So the communication, we had a conversation, Kath and I, with Rachel. First thing this morning before we came in, how do we communicate that with people over the summer to actually say, this isn't how it's going to be forever, based on what we know. We're asking you and being well supported, same in the blood service. We need to do exactly the same thing. So that hopefully will put people in the space of knowing that it's not a long-term ask, but we've got a real problem that we're trying to solve, but we have a plan. And then it's how do we wrap ourselves around and support people with the sort of interventions that Sarah talks about if people do feel getting to that sort of stage. So it's not one thing, there's a whole set of things we need to do. And how do we support people to respond to patients on the ground as well? So it's all those things need to to come together. We're handling through the conversation we're having between us and the SLT and BCC and WBS as well.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Don, it's very, very important, isn't it, that we recognise that the intrinsic motivation people feel because they want to do the very best for patients and donors. We rely on that, but also we need to recognise the underlying impact that may have on people. So we can't assure ourselves at the moment that working Saturdays isn't going to have an impact on some people, but what we can do is make sure we wrap around people everything that we should to make sure we support that, and as Steve said, provide them with a view forward that recognises this is not going to go on forever. And I think that is absolutely vital, because that's what's going to give the light at the end of the tunnel.
I think those comments, Steve, I would like them minuted, you know, that it's voluntary, it will have a proposed end date, etc., and then the wraparound. I'd like to see some of that minuted to demonstrate that we are taking the well-being of our staff very seriously and into consideration as we plan these initiatives just for the benefit of our patients. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take any comments or questions on the rest.
Are there any comments, Stephen?
It's something you just briefly touched on then. Prior to the pandemic, we used to have some support now from a volunteer workforce. And I know that's not been possible during the pandemic for very obvious reasons. I'm just wondering going forward, how much thought has been given to, as we are, well, we come out of a pandemic into an endemic, whether or not that's something we're now looking to reintroduce, but obviously in a very safe way for everybody.
Thank you, Stephen. Kath will.
Yes, there have been various times over the pandemic that we've looked at whether or not we can or can't bring our volunteers back. We have every intention to not only bring them back when it's appropriate, in appropriate ways and with the right safeguards, but also to expand the use of volunteers to consider what sort of other activities we can involve volunteers in. And that was one of the key streams within the patient engagement framework as well. So work is underway to explore exactly how we can do that as soon as we can.
It would be nice to see them back, so hopefully that will be sooner rather than later. While waiting to see if anybody else has put the, given the context which you just described and we've all just been discussing, I think the percentage of statutory mandatory is pretty impressive, I think, and would compare very well with the rest of NHS Wales. I'm not saying we couldn't do better, because we could, but I think it compares very well with the level of compliance across the rest of the NHS in Wales.
Yeah, and I'd like to pay tribute really to the divisional teams for continued emphasis on the core skills training framework, statutory mandatory training subjects, which we know are so vital, and we hear about and pick up individual topic areas in other key reports. But the continued maintenance of that is significant.
It is. So that's we note with pleasure that level of compliance, given the context we've just heard. Martin, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. On a different topic, but something you referred to, Sarah. You referred to the kind of financial well-being of staff, and I'm really pleased that we're giving that support. I presume we've got the employee assistance program that is going to help those individuals in need of that support. Clearly, the media picked up that shared services put out some messages around food banks, which didn't particularly land particularly well, I don't think. I just sort of, I want to make sure that our staff are properly supported in terms of where they need that sort of financial advice and support, they get it from the appropriate places as well. And that might have been rather a tenure sort of approach to it. I kind of just allied to that, I guess, when those pressures are going to go forward, clearly there are inflationary pressures which look at pay settlements, etc. And I know there's a good place to freeze it now under Matt's piece of work, but just understand whether those pressures are going to be alleviated any by pay awards, etc., through the next year across all of the staff workforce.
I'll pick that up, Martin, if I may. So very significantly, we've allied with a company around financial wellbeing. So we've got the employee assistance program, absolutely. We do, and that covers a myriad of advice and topics, including counselling and specific counselling for managers and how best to manage staff as well, which is really, really helpful. But then there's a separate expertise in terms of financial well-being, which can provide, it does provide rather budgeting tools for staff to use, along with a raft of other pieces of advice and low-cost loans, which people can pay back through salaries if they want to, and so on. So there's a whole raft there around that. We've also, very importantly, just recently had a conversation in the local partnership forum with trade union colleagues about all of the elements that we could do potentially to support people. So that was a very interesting and diverse conversation. We're continuing that dialogue to see what else we could do that they might suggest. Yeah, the messaging is very important around this, as we found out from shared services experience this week. But that doesn't stop us wanting to, verbalise and make clear to people that we want to support all of that. Did you want to pick up that point? I'll come back on the pay awards then.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the employee assistance programme. So over the last sort of 12 months or so, I've had a lot of contact with people who've made access to the service, and the feedback has been really good. Everybody has had, really, really prompt responses and a myriad of different support. So just to let you know, I mean, I'm probably still a small sample in terms of my experience, but everybody that I've spoken to, it has been a considerable number, have been really pleased with the service. So I think we're really lucky, fortunate that we have it, and it's being well used.
Should I just pick up the point in terms of the pay awards? So colleagues may have seen in the press last Friday, the Minister made the announcement around the pay awards for Wales on the back of the announcement in England a few days prior to that. We've received today the Welsh Health circulars in terms of the pay awards and what that means in specific detail. I haven't had a chance because I've been in this meeting really to look at that in any detail. I think we can anticipate some discussions with trade union colleagues around the levels of those pay awards. So I think we need to watch and see now what happens around member consultations based on the level of those awards. But obviously we will be bringing through all of the detail of that in our remuneration committee in due course in September.
Okay, thank you. I'm mindful of time. We've still got quite a bit to do, and it's 1:30. Matt? You can be brief, please.
The context of it is the pay awards have come through, so it's a 1,400 consolidated uplift for most people. So, but that will depend on your salary, obviously, depending on what grade you're on, and 4.5% for the medical staff. That's what I've just read. But how you put that into context is difficult depending on what pay grade you're on.
Sorry, may I just add to Matt's point? So lower paid staff who are getting a significantly higher proportion in terms of their pay award, and it's built on the additional uplift they had earlier in the year in terms of bringing people up to the living wage. So I think there's a for the first time we've seen quite a differential applied across the pay bands and then into other pay rates such as medical and dental. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so that's where Jazz is going. Okay, we'll see Jazz later. So, so we've noted previously the Cancer Centre and Welsh Bread, and we now note the performance report for workforce and OD, having had quite a robust discussion around that as well. So we come to 7.30, which is the financial report for the period ending June 2022. Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As you say, it's the report for the 30th of June. Just to point out, you'll notice that in the committee or other group assurance process is blank, and that's a timing issue. So essentially I presented the board today with the month 3 June position, because that's the latest information that we have available. But that has not yet had the opportunity to go through EMB run and QSP. So those two committees have seen the month 2 May report. But just to assure you, I will highlight any major movements between the two reports periods. So if I take you then to 1.2, so in the last committee, I think you were asked for me to make assurances in this section around the fact that the shared services financial performance is not monitored through our finance reporting, it's neutralized. So essentially that statement is saying, you know, the figures and the performance in this paper does not reflect the shared services performance, and that'll be a standard statement that's in there. So anyone who reads this report gets that context. So I take you to 2.1. This is the normal area of focus really in terms of it's our 3 key performance measures for finance. So in terms of the revenue position, We did submit a balanced financial plan, and our MTP has been signed off, as you know. But there are a number of issues and ongoing performance measures that Welsh Government will be monitoring us on. And there are elements of finance in that, as you'd expect. But we are still forecasting a balanced position, and the month position in month and to date are reflecting that, as you can see from that table. Same with the capital. So we have our discretionary and our All Wales capital funding that's been issued by Welsh Government. And as at this point, our plans are looking to be spent within that capital limit. And then moving on to the public sector payment performance, again, everything's on track in terms of our performance there. So just moving back to revenue, I do need to point out in the conversation we've had on a number of the other agenda items around performance and capacity. Obviously, one of the fairly sizable risks is the stuff we talked about, our activity and how that links to income. So the COVID additional capacity that we've invested in, and then the income that flows from that, is one of the areas that we're obviously closely monitoring in terms of that income stream versus the cost we've invested. So that is one of the financial risks that we're managing as an organisation. You'll note in section 2.5 our reserve, so we always hold an emergency reserve, and that money is used as we get issues throughout the year in terms of any emergencies where we don't have a specific budget that's set that we have to play into. A good example of that is our off-site records issue that's ongoing, where we play money into to support some of that work. So the financial risks, I flagged the COVID risk and the capacity there. The other one is making sure we got tight performance measures and monitoring of our savings. There are a number of those that are proving more difficult to implement because of our workforce challenges. So there are a couple of schemes in there that relate to redesign and reworking our workforce to release costs. And you imagine with what's just been described in the previous report, with our still heightened levels of sickness absence, and obviously the pressures in terms of creating extra capacity, any work to try and take workforce resource out is not going to be an easy one to do this year. So we have alternative schemes that we've identified in terms of replacing some of those. As you know, the TCS report is also included for the TCS programme, and that's reflected in the appendix to the more detailed report. The other thing to note, just I said I would highlight the thing that's moved from month 2 to month 3, so from May to June, under our exceptional national cost pressures. So this is on page 5 in that section in terms of the we basically had a 550,000 movement in our forecast on energy costs for this year. And that's not unusual. That's not just for us. The whole of Wales has seen that movement. And it is one of the areas obviously of concern for Welsh Government, because they are holding the financial risk around these pressures. But it's something that's obviously we're not really in control of, are we? You know, there's a whole load of things going on in the world, as you know, that's influencing the price of energy and fuel. So I'm just highlighting it to you as, you know, Welsh Government are saying they're holding the risk, but it potentially could come back to each organisation as a jointly held risk. So it's not a certainty that they're going to manage that. And then moving on to capital, well, I've told you that at the moment, you know, we're on track in terms of all of our schemes there. So it's really to ask the board to note the contents of the reports in terms of the main report for the core trust, but also then the appended TCS programme.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any, Stephen, I can see your hand up. No electronic hands are there? No, okay.
Sorry, Matt, just more for the minute than anything. When he mentioned the other exceptional national cost pressures, he referred to 550 million, no, the 550,000 as energy cost increases. I think that's the national insurance figure. And
apologies.
Yeah, and the energy one is significantly higher at 1.6 million. So I just wanted to clarify that, just so we've got the minute correct. That is 550k is the national insurance increase, and the other figure of 1.6 million is the energy.
Isn't that what it says?
No,
yeah, that's what it does say. Sorry, I was paying very careful attention.
Oh, right.
And I think, well, you said the 550k was the energy.
It's two figures of 550, sorry, and I haven't written the increase, so that is the total forecast increase.
Okay,
sorry,
great.
the movement from month 2, the May to June, unfortunately, is the same, apologies, I should have made that clear. It's the actual increase happens to be the same figure from the month 2 year-end forecast on energy to the month 3 as the national insurance cost pressure. Sorry.
Just showing it was paying.
No, it's a good point because I should have explained it better in the first place.
Thank you, Stephen. Martin?
Thanks, Chair. Matt, thanks. I understand the timing of this, so it hasn't been to the process. It's helpful to get the most up-to-date figures. I just want to talk about the savings section, top of page 5 of the paper. It says, due to the ongoing pandemic, there's a risk that some of the savings that are VAG-rated amber may not be fully achieved. I just wonder where we are on that, because obviously if they aren't achieved, then our financial plan falls out of whack. In the report itself, it's currently marked as, if the savings thing is marked as green. So I presume you're suggesting that we'll find other areas to catch that any potential gaps up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it refers back to, again, I may not have been explicitly clear. So there were a couple of schemes that are relating to workforce, and with all of the pressures that we just described, they're the ones that we're not delivering on, but we have got alternative schemes. But the issue with some of those are they're not recurrent schemes. So, potentially next year that creates additional pressure. So obviously what I'm asking the teams to do, as well as those non-recurrent measures, to have early plans, or as best they can, to pick up that recurrent impact, as well as obviously looking forward for the future as well in terms of schemes for next year, rather than trying to plan from one year to the next. So forward thinking on some of it, but it is difficult, in the circumstances we're working in.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. That's really helpful.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Any other queries? If not, we've discussed the financial report, and we're noting the contents of the June 2022 financial report, and in particular the financial performance to date and the year-end forecast to achieve financial break-even, and the key risks in relation to income to cover COVID backlog, additional capacity costs, which Matt has pointed out to us. And we're also noting the TCS programme financial report for June 2022 is attached in Appendix 1. We didn't discuss Appendix 1. Does anybody want to raise anything from there? No? Okay, so thank you, Matt, for that. Under 7.40, we come to the risk register, which I know is Lauren's favourite topic of all for the Trust Board. So Lauren, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, she is. I do like this. So in the interest of time, I'll just focus on the points from the previous governance cycle, so we can focus in on section 2. When this review of the May data extract of DataX was reviewed at Executive Management Board, there were 2 key points which are called out there that we discussed. Firstly, there's an overall risk at level 20 around radiotherapy capacity, but as EMB, we felt that the service risks around capacity and SACT were not appropriately represented in a similar way. Yeah. So we've asked for that to be assessed. And the second was reflected on the workforce and finance work that Sarah and Matt lead and ends up in QSP. Actually, the way in which the risks are articulated through that important developing work can also consider how they are reflected in specific data risks as well. So that work is underway. The second is around the in terms of the use of DataX. There's another section. So the cover paper shows the controls column. There's another section in DataX where action plan need to be filled out, and that is being inconsistently filled out. So we'll come on to the level 2 training, but it's part of the level 2 training. So at the moment, some users are using the control part of the form to also reflect on some action. So they need to be properly split out, and then that can be included, and then that will be included in the extract for next reporting. So then during the review by the Quality, Safety and Performance Committee, IMs, and the Audit Committee, There were two specific risks at level 20, which both committees requested further detail on. Rather than sort of stop the flow, so I'll just cover the other points, then I'll pass the CAF for those two. I think, so from, appreciate I wasn't in the conversation, Vicky, but wanted to reflect in 3B that as a result of not being clear action plans, smart action plans against some of these high rated risks, that QSP were not prepared to assure the board on the risk register in this current iteration. So that hopefully reflects that wording. Yeah.
I think just to be clear, because I think it was actually what we see in the paper, whether that was a representation of what the risk register was or some of the missing elements that you've just been outlining, because actually we needed to be confident that the actions and the timing of those actions, and therefore the next risk score was going to be it, and it doesn't currently represent that in terms of what comes to QSP in particular, but the same with audit committee as well.
Yeah.
So it's that being specific. Get my words like right. I was going to say the longer word, but it didn't work.
Martin.
Yeah, thanks. I think on that, the conversation we had, whether not to repeat the conversation, but some of the discussions we had at audit committee was around adding, as Lauren's rightly said, just making sure the register as such contains more information about the so what and what are we going to do to address these things going forward. Just the other thing, just to be clear of, is that the risk register isn't simply a numbers game. If you pile 100 risks into DTX and press a button that says print us the top scoring ones, that's not necessarily a corporate risk register. The corporate risk register is things which are of most concern to the board, which might not necessarily be the higher scoring ones because of kind of moderation issues you need to have in there. So we need just to have a little bit more sophistication, I guess, in how we extract from DTX, and whether that's through EMB or elsewhere, because an individual might say, Mohammed, for example, might say that infection is the most important thing in the world, and 1 C. diff is the end of the world, and that's a huge risk. And of course, it is a risk. But as a board, we might not take that same position because something else might be a bigger risk. Just understanding how we do that moderation is really important to make sure that when we get the information that comes to us, that is actually passes the sort of the board's kind of smell test. That looks like what our risk register actually looks like. So I'm really supportive where we got to. There's just a little bit further to go.
Yeah. And I'll, yes, thank you both. And I'll come back to that point on calibration, Martin. And as we talk about the training. So there was some other specifics around the way in which the extract is presented in different committees needs to be consistent, and that is a point well made, and we are doing that, and that will be addressed from September onwards. Understand there was some the commentary in the controls section on a couple of the TCS program risks. Note that the project remains on hold, so those risks haven't been reviewed. So just to confirm that that's remains within the commentary. And then in terms of the risk framework itself, there has been significant progress over the last period, which is I'm pleased to report, because some of this work has been going on for a little while. But since we last met in May, the new risk policy has been endorsed by Executive Management Board, has been considered by Audit Committee. Audit Committee asked that alongside the risk policy, the risk appetite strategy is in the process of being updated, as we've talked about before, because we want to change, we think, some of the calibration of levels of reporting. But it was just to make sure that the Audit Committee had a recent sight of that document, which will circulate and then ask for board approval after Audit Committee is out of committee endorsement. And the other significant progress has been in training. So the level 2 training is really important, because that's the management level access to DataX, who have responsibility for the score, for inputting the controls and the action plans, and then from a management perspective, overseeing the management of risk. So as you say, Martin, it's not an input system, it's a tool to support management. So that we've now trained over 100 people at the level 2 level over 7 sessions so far. The remainder are being finalised for August and a couple in early September. And in addition then at level 3, in our leadership roles, we discussed that at the board development session in June, obviously for the board, done the same with EMB and the senior leadership teams. And calibration is absolutely key to that level 3 responsibilities. Throughout all of our committees and leadership roles, we have to ensure that we review top down, as you say, Martin. So I think hopefully that captures, I appreciate it's been a bit of a handover from Emma and I just over the last couple of days. On the 2 specific risks at 20, there was the radiotherapy capacity one, and there was a new technology or system related one which had been input in May. I don't know whether you wanted to.
Yes, actually this one is going to be closed because this was as it went in and into the cycle. Since then work has been undertaken. Software itself only transfers data scans from external sources. We're using it for the Runford. So it's scans that have been undertaken elsewhere and then
Sorry, Chair, could Kath turn her microphone on?
I'm sorry, Gareth. My apologies.
Thanks, Gareth.
So since this cycle of these papers has commenced, further work has been undertaken on this risk. The software captures scans that are undertaken in third parties. So for us, this is what we were using with Rutherford. Now that we're not using Rutherford anymore, the need for this software has been eliminated, so that's now that's no longer a risk. It was I think this is an example of where what Martin was just highlighting, I think, in terms of that trajectory and being a little bit more specific. So I think your points are well made. Was there anything else you wanted me to cover off, Lauren?
Both committees asked for more detail on the action plan of the radiotherapy one as well, which
yes, sorry, that's which number is can you tell me which number that is?
Earlier in the agenda?
I think so. I think
I
it was
think it was
recorded here.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've given you some information on exactly what's happening, but I absolutely recognise the point that you've made is absolutely spot on in terms of how we put the wrap around these, both what we include in Datex and then actually what we report in the narrative that goes with them. So yeah, absolutely take that on board.
Okay, can't see any other hands up.
Oh,
It's
sorry,
good to.
Vicky.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Who's got the hand up? You have, Lauren. Oh, Vicky. Sorry, Vicky.
No,
I promise you, I keep looking round, and then the minute I
Sorry.
turn the other way, somebody's hand pops up.
I'm not doing it on purpose, honestly. I think it's just in terms of the policy and the procedure, because the discussion in Audit Committee and in QSP was one about how do we as a board, IMs, navigate our way through a policy that makes reference to other strategies or other procedures, and that we needed them all appending to each other, to the policy, to make it clear about the route map through all of that and how we manage the risks as a member of staff and as a member of the board. And at the moment, they're still looking as separate documents. So the discussion was about how we would append the risk appetite strategy, how we would append the corporate risk management procedure to make it clear about the links with what's been stated in the policy to other references. So we've got everything together.
So that's every time.
Yeah, that wasn't okay. Maybe it's worth reflecting on that, because that's not what we do in any other case. Because we have so the document that we approved in, I know Emma and Kay always keep telling me there's a different name for this now, but the policy of policies that we approved in March as a board sets out which policies and trust level documents are for approval at which level. So there's obviously the ones delegated from the ones retained at board, and then which are delegated to various committees. So for the risk policy, in the risk domain, there's 2 documents which are board level approval and committee level approval. So that's the risk policy and the risk appetite strategy. The others, in terms of procedures and standard operating procedures, are not at that level. And that would be the case, you know, for all the policies we've approved today. They'd all have procedures and things.
I think just to clarify, that isn't what I mean in terms of an approval route. Just to make sense of, there were some things within the risk management policy that were not in there that you'd expect to be in there. And by appending the other documents wherever they've been approved would then help to be able to make sense of actually how you're going to manage the risks.
Okay.
So I wasn't talking about the approval. I'm talking about actually being clear for staff within the organisation and ourselves as IMs and as part of the board, actually how we manage the risks and how you would escalate risks from a divisional risk and whether it's appropriate to be on a corporate risk register. So it's the route map.
So I'm very, you know, obviously I'll do whatever we want to do, but so very happy with it, with this. Well, of course, I'm very happy with that. Of course, I'll just do it. But just checking it wasn't a wider point, because if we extrapolated that across the whole of our policy framework, it would.
So are you content to have a discussion perhaps with Vicky
I'll circulate
and possibly Martin outside the board
course,
and come
yeah.
to an agreement about how that best gets taken forward? And that would be, I think, extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we note the risk levels 20 reported in the trust risk register, the two of them highlighted in the paper. And it is good to see this developing and maturing. It really is. And we look forward to its continued development. And we've just had a suggestion about how that might happen from Vicky. So thank you for that. 7.5 is the trust assurance framework.
Thank you. So, so again, this has been to the Strategic Development Committee and the Audit Committee in this cycle. And as we discussed in the June Board Development Day, based on some excellent feedback from our colleagues in Audit Wales and Internal Audit, the way in which the risks will be considered across our committee structure is something that we are now addressing and will be picked up from the autumn. So just to note a few points. So on the again in section 2 of key matters that we are considering for the next stage of the development, as we've said, the first part in terms of linking the risk, performance and quality frameworks is to link the risk register into the assurance framework to ensure that the relevant risks under each of the datex under each of the strategic risks are linked. We are going through we're just going through a planning process at the moment for September work, which will then be brought into the October board development session around refreshing the risks in this risk register to bring in, which will bring in a concept of reverse stress testing and looking at some specialist external support for that session, which will be good. And we, as it notes there, you don't need to, just not going to repeat it, talking about how we move this onto datex so we don't have to keep using an Excel format. And then section 221 talks around the specific risks that through our previous governance cycles we've agreed various actions that we're progressing. I've already mentioned the map to governance cycle, and the 223 is just noting that again in Executive Management Board we've agreed that we will link the trust assurance framework to the audit tracker. Sorry, I'm sort of cantering through that because we've had a good discussion on it in board development in June as well.
We did, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Are there any queries, observations, comments for Lauren, please, on the trust assurance framework? Martin?
Yeah, just to say that this has been through various iterations, and I think we're in a really good place now. Clearly, one of the things the cover paper talks about is the regular update, and I think that's excellent. And I think that's really how it'll work. It'll just mature as people get used to this, and it becomes part of their suite of management rather than something that happens because the committee wants it. I think the more that gets embedded, the better it is for everyone. Brilliant, thanks. So thanks.
Thanks, Martin. I'm
Yeah,
sure
thank
those are very welcome
Yeah.
received comments. And Lauren, I think that you alluded to the fact that in our next board development session, which is the end of next month, there'll be a development session on reverse stress testing.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would welcome that so that I understand it fully and then can participate in the discussions appropriately. So, oh, Gareth, I can see your hand up. Sorry if I've missed it.
No, that's okay, Chair. I just wanted to raise a point which I had made at, I think it was Audit Committee, and just taking as an example, the risk TAF 10, where we are currently at 12, as I understand it, and our target risk rating is 8. But then in the action plan, both items in the action plan are complete. So I'm just trying to understand what are we going to do in order to get it back down to 8? Should there be other actions in there now? Because looking at the action plan, it seems to suggest, well, we've done all we're going to do on this now, but the risk is still at 12 instead of the target of 8.
So you're right, Gareth. So the actual answer is around the governance and assurance work stream programme of work that will form part of our organisational design work, but that isn't reflected in the paper, so apologies. So we will update that.
Yeah, so each risk.
So there are actions underway for this level 10 risk to reduce the score, but you're right, it's not properly reflected in the paper at the moment.
Yeah, okay. So the general point is that each risk where we haven't got to the target score should, in theory, have outstanding actions against them before we get down to the target figure.
Yes, they should. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we'll see that. Right. Okay. We'll see that next time. Oh, Gareth just disappeared. Oh, there he's back. Okay. Thanks, Gareth. For pointing that out to us. Any other issues in relation to the trust assurance framework? Thank you. So 7.6 is the Audit Committee highlight report. Did you want to introduce this then, please, Martin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to point out that the highlight report in front of you relates to the Audit Committee meeting we had on the 3rd of May. So really, this should have come to the last board meeting, where we did get an update from Matt on some of the hot topics on here. And it's largely been overtaken by events. So I'm probably better just to talk about the Audit Committee meeting we had on the 19th of July, which is literally just last week. So you haven't got a paper for that. If I give you a quick highlights from that. Clearly, we talked about the risk register and the trust assurance framework. We've just had reports on, and they took up quite a chunk of time on it. But I think the real things to refer to this committee are around the work we're now doing on private patients, following on from the external assessment review we had. There's now an action plan in place, and that's going to be shared across the committees to make sure that that is actually delivered. I think that's really, really welcome, and the Audit Committee has been working with us for a while, and I think it's heartening to see real progress on that now. And the other area to talk about, which was the red risk last time, was about the sort of management of overdue recommendations. And we had a long conversation about this, and I'm really pleased that processes have been put in place to manage this in a far better, put it on a far better footing, so that the recommendations are properly monitored, controlled, and we have action deadlines which are achievable and are delivered upon, and there's a monitoring process. So again, with the help of internal audit who've looked in this area, really helpful progress report on that.
So this is in relation to the highlight report from the 3rd of May 2022, you're just referring to. So the alert escalate section in there, that situation has moved on, and you've received assurance that there will be a process in place which will there be appropriate tracking?
I think anyone who's at the 3rd of May Audit Committee would be under no illusions of the concerns that the Audit Committee had, and they've been fully addressed, and there are a process in place which are going to make sure that we don't get to the position we got to then again.
So audit committee doing its work. Thank you very much. That's excellent.
And the other thing, just for information, is that, again, we received a suite of internal audit reports. Also, don't give you all the details of it. I think that the headline is that all of those reports received substantial and reasonable assurance reports, including some around the VCC program, the NVCC program, which is very
good.
welcome. So that's all I want to say, really.
Thank you, Martin. Does anybody want to raise any issues with Martin? If not, we note that report. Thank you. And then we've got the QSP highlight report from the 14th of July. Vicky, if you want to introduce this to us.
Yeah, certainly. And I think a lot of the business that went through that committee has also been through the board today.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm not going to repeat that. I think it's worth the escalation section though, because in our discussions about CVAS and IP5, there were some issues that arose out of the discussion which were really helpful in terms of the governance processes about the development and sign off of new products.
Yeah.
And I think the committee certainly need to understand that in better granularity, get my words out again.
Just to interrupt for a minute, Steve, I think you've already begun discussions with.
Well, if
go on.
Vicky finishes, I think it's a related point.
Yeah.
And I'll pick up both of them, don't I?
Yeah, so the other related issue is about the cytotoxic medications. So there was a verbal presentation of the reasons why they couldn't do that. And we certainly wanted to understand the categorization, didn't we, and distinction of the sort of immunotherapy medicines, which Jazz, you helpfully gave us an outline of, but just it led to a need again for the governance and being cited on those issues rather than isolated decision-making from shared services. We needed to understand the governance process around that.
Well, I think actually some of it came as a bit of a surprise to us, didn't it?
Exactly, that's what I'm
honest.
I'm being kind, I guess, in terms of being political. But I think it's both of the issues were certainly very clear from the conversation that we needed to quickly have wider discussions and have updates. And I think it will also lead into the discussion we had in the board development with shared services about the wider issues that need to come through QSP, so that we understand the governance and we understand and can provide assurance where we're required to as well. But hand back to Steve.
Yeah, respond on those 2 points then.
Yeah, I've had a meeting's been set up with Jazz and I to meet with the director of the unit who couldn't make, unfortunately, the meeting because he was away ill. That's been set up, and there's been a bit of email dialogue in between, and I've also met with the managing director of shared services partner that regular and I flagged up the issues to him there as well. So we'll pursue those, Vicky. So
yeah, lovely.
And we'll feedback. I haven't got a date for it yet, but I'll feedback at the next QSP committee.
So there's no progress on these issues, no further understanding on these issues at the moment.
No.
But you'll feedback. I mean, I think we were very concerned at QSP about the lack of governance wraparound, particularly for the process of the development and sign up of new products, and that it came as a surprise to us to hear the comments about cytotoxic medicines. So we would welcome an update on that as soon as you're able to talk with the relevant staff, Steve.
Yes, when we got better understanding and it was conveyed to the committee, I suspect that will be where we get to. But at least we need to understand it before we understand whether it is a real issue or just a communication breakdown on the day. And then we need to improve the reporting process to make sure that we close the link based on whatever we do.
Exactly.
So Andrew wanted to come in.
Just comment, we need to be really careful about our definitions here. Cytotoxic chemotherapy, cytotoxic agents are toxic to living cells. That's our chemotherapy. Immunotherapy is different and engages the immune system. I think we need to just define these very carefully, because when we say cytotoxic, that's our standard. That's SACT, right?
Yeah.
Normal parlance.
But which is
so
what
we have to be careful.
What's his name of the guy? I've forgotten his name. Gareth, was it?
Is it
Gareth Tyrrell?
Because this has been live streamed, isn't it? Just
Yeah. I think it was the term that was used, so we're repeating it. But I take the distinction. Point well made, Andrew.
We can just sharpen some definitions so that we,
And I'll probably just say that was part of the problem.
Yeah, but I think
so
Jazz,
we've got a lot of clearing up to do.
Yeah,
on this issue.
I think in QSP, Jazz helpfully outlined key differences in terms of those definitions. Their reports that come through need to be clear on those definitions.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the only other issue that I've put down in the escalate was obviously the developmental process between finance and workforce. The triangulated paper is really helping the committee to be able to understand the risks and what's happening and the consequence of those risks as well. I think the committee just would like some more specific deadlines in terms of actions being taken so that we can see the progress in terms of particularly recruitment and retention. But I think that's all I want to highlight. The rest is there for information.
Thank you, Vicky. Anybody want to raise any issues? It was an interesting and long and detailed meeting as usual, QSP, but I think we are noticing, that, as you say, Vicky, the triangulation between finance, workforce and quality issues, and which is very reassuring. So we note that report. I haven't been informed that there's any other business. So thank you, everybody. It's been a long meeting and we've discussed some very weighty issues. Thank you for your diligence and attention. And I propose that we now close the meeting and that we adopt the resolution that representatives of the press and other members of the public be excluded from the remainder of this meeting, having regard for the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, publicity on which would be prejudicial to the public interest in accordance with section 1(2) Public Bodies Admission to Meetings Act 1960, paragraph 67. And the date and time of the next meeting is the 29th of September 2022, and unless COVID presents us with any more presence, it'll be an in-person meeting. So that's the plan at the moment, but we'll see what COVID has in store for us. Thank you, everybody. And we have run over time a little bit. Could we come back at 2:30, please, to start the private board meeting?